said over there, Heather.
Well, welcome. It's 7 o'clock. I think we'll begin our meeting. My name is Will Summercorn. I'm the newly elected chair of the Planning Commission, so this is going to be my first time getting to bang the gavel. So this will be, we'll see how that goes. I think I'd just like to take a minute or two and have our new planning commissioners introduce themselves. We have a couple of new members. We had one new member here at our last meeting on July 11th, and then we didn't have our a meeting on after the 24th of July, so this is our next meeting. And let's take a moment and have you two introduce yourselves just briefly.
Okay. Quan Nguyen, been in Kaysville for about 4 years now. Do human resources. Before that, was in the Marine Corps.
Okay, great.
My name is Toby Barris. I've been a resident of Kaysville for a little over 10 years now, and I work for Zions Bank Corporation as a data scientist.
Well, welcome. Glad to have you here. Always good to see people willing to serve and not know what they're getting themselves into. So we'll hear some of that tonight, I'm sure, and see some good actions. First item on our agenda would be the approval of the minutes from our July 11th meeting. For those commission members who were there, has everyone reviewed it and ready to make a motion? Or any corrections?
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes from July 11th meeting.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Those are easy. Good to take care of. All right. Let's see. We'll move on to our first item of business tonight, which is a public hearing for a rezone of 0.38 acres of combined property at 520 and 540 East 200 North from the RD diverse residential zone to the RM multifamily residential zoning district, and to include a planned residential unit development, a PRUD overlay. The applicant is Brent Birmingham. We'll start by turning to our staff to give us a presentation on this item.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. As a brief introduction, the property that you can see within your packet there and on the screen in front of us is on the south side of 200 North, again midway between 5th and 6th East in the block. It's an existing developed property. There are currently two different structures on it, each a duplex, currently on site. Just to give you some orientation, as we're discussing zoning activity, you can look at it in its proximity to the different zoning districts around it. It's on the perimeter of the RD residential diverse zoning district there in orange, and then surrounded otherwise by an R18 single family zoning designation throughout the area. Maybe the brief summary of the RD district residential diverse is it's essentially set up so that, as I understand it historically, it's got quite a dynamic of single family, 2, 3, 4plex throughout. But eventually that part of town was concerned that they were getting more than their share of the diversification and housing types. And so the zone changed to this existing designation where it allows existing single family and multifamily units to remain, but new development would essentially be single family only. The way I interpret the ordinance, I think where there are already 4 units on this site, I believe they could redevelop those 4 units under the existing designation. The applicant, however, is requesting the RM zoning district, which could allow for additional units. And then the PRUD portion of the development, the planned residential unit development, allows for a little more flexibility on how those could be developed on site. Primarily in my discussion with the applicant, for example, currently have duplex, 2 units on one property. With the PRUD, you can plat each unit separately so that each unit could be owner occupied. So that's one of the primary reasons for consideration on that. We'll let the applicant maybe speak a little bit more to the product or some of the ideas that they have for the property. You can see currently the existing site there in there. So we spoke about the 2 different buildings. This rezone would cover all of that property and give the potential for some different options and redevelopment for that entire site. As a reminder, those who have been on the commission for a while, forgive me, but hopefully for those who are new, the rezone is a legislative action that gives you as a planning commission a lot of discretion in what you're thinking. So First off, you're here to make a recommendation that will pass along to the City Council. They'll ultimately have the final say as to whether or not it's approved, denied, or otherwise. But within your recommendation, as you look at the general plan, at the area, the vicinity, does it seem to work well for that site? Your motion and recommendation would be based on that, and then we'll forward that along to the commission for you. As stated by the chair, it's a public hearing this evening. The applicant is here as well to provide additional information, and I'll return it to you, Mr. Chair, and be happy to take any questions.
Any questions from any of the commission members of staff? Lyle, is there anything specific proposed for the property?
The applicant could speak to that. He's told me some ideas of projects he's seen around town, maybe just where I've got control of the maps here. It takes a little bit of imagination on this map, but right next to Heritage Park, behind Biker's Edge off of Crestwood, they're just wrapping up construction on a set of townhomes. There are 2 buildings, each with 3 units in each. He's mentioned that that's something that he likes and would like to do something similar to that. So map's probably worthless there, but that's this RM zoning designation here right next to Heritage Park off of Crestwood. Again, he could speak further to it, but the RM zoning designation allows for a density of approximately 15.5 units an acre once you do all the calculations with it. And so I believe that would let him get more than the 2 units per property that are currently there.
Well, and one of the reasons I ask is because they're asking for the PRUD designation with it, which...
And that's how that one was developed, for multiple reasons. It can, should the commission and city council feel it appropriate, allow for some flexibility and setbacks, so you can site and position buildings on the property with a little more flexibility. But the big key has been, at least in my experience here with Kaysville City, that desire to have the potential for owner occupancy. And without it, we can't plat individual units for sale individually unless we do utilize the PRUD. So it's done as a common open space subdivision where they'll share often the drive, the parking, and some the open area landscape around it in common. But then they own their own home. Developer could choose to maintain all those as well and not sell them, but the option's on the table at that point.
Okay. Any other questions from any of the commission members?
Maybe just for the applicant.
Okay, let's invite the applicant, Brent Birmingham, forward, and let's hear from you what you're thinking and proposing.
All right. Well, to be candid with you, I don't think this is so much a typical development proposal. I'm not really...
Is there any way of turning it, Mike? It's hard to hear you.
Is it not on?
It's on.
You may just have to get pretty close to it.
Okay.
And I'll try and do the same.
Is that
Thank you.
okay? I'm motivated with this application to solve a problem, not necessarily out of development interests. Although we need to explore all options as far as how to solve this problem. In fact, I was recommended by staff to make this application just to see what we could do to resolve some issues that we've run across. So I've owned this property for some time. Made a decision to sell the unit on the left at 540 East, and we listed that. We received some offers, went under contract. In the due diligence discussions with the prospective buyer, there were concerns over the fact that the way these lots are laid out, both buildings crowd the east side of the lot. So it's 2 adjacent lots. They're basically identical buildings on the east side. So in the due diligence, we were expecting to retain an easement over that driveway curb cut for access for the west building to continue to have a right-of-way to get back to the parking spaces. The buyer objected. It resulted in some controversy, ultimately scuttled the sale. So we're still listed on the MLS to sell these, but not entertaining any offers until we find out what the outcome of this application is as to what our different options may be. So if we can go back to the overhead view, this shows pretty well what's going on here. The line is not exactly right, but it's very good at illustrating what the problem is. You'll notice that the yellow line that's the midline is, in this picture, right on the edge of the west building. That's not quite accurate. It has its standard 8-foot side yard or setback. So that line would more appropriately be down the middle of those vehicles.
Okay.
But that is the problem we have, is to maintain parking at the west unit as it's been for the last, well, 30 plus years as far as I know, maybe 40 or so. There has to be some kind of accommodation, either an easement acceptable to a buyer on the east unit or some reconfiguration of the west unit. So when this controversy erupted, both the buyer and I went to the city separately to see what different kinds of things could be done as far as expanding the curb cut, adding additional parking, reconfiguring around the existing building, and all of those options entailed pretty stiff price tags, which made us wonder, you know, at some point you've got to wonder whether it's time to do something different with the property than just try to accommodate what's existing on the property. Therein lies the motivation for this application, to try to solve this dilemma. So in doing that, I attended a couple of meetings. I've become somewhat familiar with the general plan, and from those things, I think there's potential here to have kind of a win-win situation where we can solve the problems with these two lots, as well as achieve some of the objectives of the general plan, and most recently, this Senate Bill 34 that's been in discussion in this commission over the last few sessions. So one of the things that, and this is on page 5 of the meeting packet, but the general plan calls for, or allows rather, higher density along major streets, 200 North being singled out as being one of those types of streets, and also that an object of the general plan is to have this multi-unit, multi-family kind of residence scattered throughout the city, about 10% roughly it says, with some of those ranging from 3 to 6 units. Also in that general plan is a mention of refurbishing or replacing deteriorated structures, of which I would think these qualify. These buildings were built in 1960 and 1961. They don't have really any redeeming architectural character, so you know it's worth considering them being one of these that would be potentially rehabilitated or raised and substituted with something more appropriate. With regard to the Senate Bill 34, it mandates that cities adopt 3 of 24 different offered solutions to the moderate income housing crisis that's prevalent throughout different parts of the state. And I know in prior meetings, this group has narrowed those 24 suggestions down to about 10 that you're seriously considering. And from those, I'm sure you'll decide on those that are most appropriate. But as I looked at that list, maybe 5 of those could be applicable to this, but the most appropriate in our view would be to rezone. That would allow us to raise the buildings, or at least the west building, move it, and in doing so increase the density in a way that both provides a greater density and more affordable housing, and also makes it worthwhile financially to make that kind of a change to the lot. Other things that are mentioned and important in that Senate Bill 34 are the need to tie this kind of thing to transportation. Now, I have lived about 14 years in the neighborhoods just north of where this property is, and I have had a minor home occupation. And in the course of those years with that minor home occupation, I've had people of moderate means come to me from places far away as Clearfield and Ogden on public transportation, because this is very near a significant UTA transportation line. So if you were to take the overhead view, there's a route, I think it's Davis-Weber bus line, goes to the Davis-Weber campus, out to DATC, and at various points along that route also connects up with more major routes that run north and south from Ogden to Salt Lake and that sort of thing. So just at the corner of 200 North and 500 East, about where that black car is passing that white rectangle, the corner building on the far left, there is a bus stop for that line. So this is a location that I think is quite proximal to public transportation, which would make it, I think, an ideal location for a higher density with people that would, have access to public transportation and be in keeping. Very, very good. So here is the bus stop is right here. And that bus route runs north and south from the cemetery down to DATC. It connects 500 South to the main routes on Main Street. So that gives you some sense of how close that is. It was mentioned in one of the questions that led to you calling me up what our plans were for this. And I've got to be candid. Our plan is to see what your plan is with this. But in driving frequently into the postal building, there is a building under construction that he mentioned on Crestwood that is a parcel just this size. Well, it's 0.41 acres. This is 0.38. And the difference is their square has a irregularity on one side where it's a little deeper on one side, so it has a little triangle in addition to the square you see here. But on theirs, they have 6 units in 2 buildings, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garages, that sort of thing, configured like this, facing one another, but fitting that space. And so that was kind of our inspiration of what could be possible. We have the same footprint, the dimensions work. We could do that identical kind of thing or something different. As you mentioned, the density here at multifamily would be up to 15 per acre. With the size here, that would be, I don't know, 6-ish, 7 maybe, I don't know, but something close to that. So we'd be looking at possibly a combination of single and or 2-car garage units, again, 2 or 3 bedrooms. And as far as size and mass considerations go, the building, it's on a slope, and the buildings on both the high side and the low side are 2-story or 1.5 story. They've got bonus rooms and things in a 2nd story. And so we think that 2-story structures wouldn't be out of place at this location. That's about all I had prepared. If you've got questions, I'd be happy to field them.
I have a question. Would the intention be to rent these units out or to sell them, or?
Well, as you maybe gathered from what I said, our intention was already to sell part of this.
Okay.
So our intention would remain to sell part. Thus, the PRUD really fits with that. Of the offers we received, most offers were owner-occupied offers to buy the duplex on the east side. So we would anticipate that we would continue to have that kind of opportunity with new construction to have owner-occupied.
Okay, do you have an existing plan for the other unit? Or is it, would you just kind of leave it as is?
Well, in looking at the rigors of construction, I think, and this is, again, maybe a premature, unresearched and investigated opinion of mine, but it would seem to me best to raise both and do them both
At the same time.
with the same kind of theme, same development,
Okay.
same construction mess, just be one and done.
Okay. That makes sense.
So the number of units you have there now currently is, between the two buildings, is 4?
4, 2 on the east, 2 on the west.
Okay.
They're front to back, side by sides. So 2 units near the street, 2 units away from the street.
Okay. Other questions?
Yeah, you mentioned affordable housing. I applaud that. So do you have an idea what the sell price would be?
Yeah, in fact, I made some calls and looked at some things in Centerville and in Layton, in other places where there are things like this going up. And a 2-car garage, 3-bedroom, 2-bath unit, they tend to be going around 225, 250 in that range. And so one of the things I think in the last meeting that was brought up is we're looking at a target not to exceed 225 to qualify for the ultimate price tag that we're targeting with this legislation. That is one of the reasons why we would like to consider single garage units, higher density. So if we can spread the development cost over more units and maximize the unit number, we can drive the price down. And ideally, we'd have prices under 2,000 or 200,000.
How many units then would be ideal for you?
Well, I think the maximum that we could do would be 8, and we'd have to look at the square footage. So on the county recorder's documents, it's reflected as 0.19 per lot. What the actual square feet are, I don't know.
Okay.
The code here is written in terms of actual square feet, and so I think we are, as I look at it, we're within about 300 square feet, just based on reverse, mathematics on the 0.19. We're within a couple hundred square feet of having enough to do a maximum of 8. So if we could get to that, 8 would be the max, but it would be something between 4 and 8.
Okay.
Other questions? Okay, thanks, Mr. Birmingham.
Thank you.
We'll come to the public hearing portion of the meeting now, which we'll open and ask those who are interested or would like to make a comment about this proposal to come forward. When you do come forward, please state your name and address, and generally try to keep your comments brief and to the point. We do sometimes impose time limits when we have a lot of people wishing to comment, but I don't think we have that large of a group here tonight, but we still would ask you to try to be succinct and fairly brief in your comments. We do reserve the right at some point to limit the length of time for speaking if we do run into a time issue, but I don't anticipate that. It's not that big of a group here tonight. Lyle, do you have something?
I was just getting the clock ready in case you did want to do a time limit. So
We won't do it yet.
okay.
We'll see how it goes. So with that, we'll now open the public hearing portion of this meeting. Anyone who's interested in commenting on this proposal, please come forward.
I have a couple of questions. When you use the word,
Ma'am, could you give us your name and address, please?
okay, I'm Diana Hill. We live at 589 East, 200 North, right there on the corner. So when you use the word unit, are you talking?
Yeah, if you would, if you'd address us and then,
Okay. Using the word unit, do you mean single-family homes? I'm not sure. It kind of seemed both ways.
a unit generally means one place where a family would live.
But they could be, like a duplex would be 2 units, is
Right.
that it?
Yep.
Okay. So he's saying now, he's thinking 2 stories high, but is there any limit? Could he change his mind and go higher?
Well, he would be limited by what the zoning regulation allows based on the square footage or the area of the lot. And Lyle, I think, is, as Mr. Birmingham stated, probably about 7 or 8 maximum possible.
Yeah, I would have to get a survey to see how tight that is
Yeah.
to get those. I think it'd probably be on the lower end. If I don't know that he'd get 8 out of it. And then the height in the RM zone is the same limitation of any R residential zoning district within Kaysville. They're all limited to 30 feet. So depending on the construction details, it could theoretically be 3 stories based on that height limit. based on the existing zoning. If based on comments and the planning commission's desires, we could restrict it specifically to 2 stories through a development agreement. However, 2 stories can be equally as tall as 3 stories, depending on how you build it. So there are different ways you could word that, depending on what you're wanting to address.
So I guess the answer is probably maximum 7 or 8 units, and it could well be less depending on the design and how they could fit it on the property.
And I really don't understand the process. Is tonight the final approval, or are there more steps where there'll be more chance for us to see exactly what he's planning and have more input?
Yeah, tonight he's just asking for a rezone of the property. He's not asking for an approval of the development of a proposal to develop. So for the rezone, it's still, the planning commission tonight will consider it and make a recommendation that goes on to the city council. And then the city council will have a hearing on it as well and take comment, and then they'll make the decision whether to rezone. If the city council rezone it, then the applicant would have to come back with a design proposal for what he wants to build there and go through a process again.
Thank you for clarifying.
You're welcome.
And can I add something to that, Wilf?
Yeah, please, Josh.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Lyle or anybody. If he gets rezoned to the RM and with the PRUD, but he doesn't technically need any type of proposal for what it's going to look like. He's just saying if it fits in the RM and the PRUD, then we may not ever see it, or would we see it because of the PRUD?
Yeah, so when it were to come back before the planning commission, if you grant a zone, if it fits within the restrictions or parameters of that zoning district, then you will still see it because the subdivision process would be necessary in the case of this particular one because of the PRUD. So you would see it through a subdivision process. However, the decision-making changes from your legislative discretionary decision this evening on whether or not the zone is appropriate to does it meet what the zone requires. There are, however, so within the RM zoning district, as a permitted use, multifamily dwellings are permitted. So if it's developed without subdividing the property, they put a 3-plex on one of the properties, for example, that's a permitted use. That is not something that the planning commission would see. They simply go before a building permit for approval, and we internally do the administrative checking to make sure they meet their height and units and so forth. So there are a couple scenarios on this under the requested zone, whether or not you might see it again.
Yeah, so I guess my point is that it's possible that even through this process, if it goes to city council, that there would not ever be anything specific proposed through this application process.
That's correct.
Right.
Okay, let's go to you.
I'm kind of lost. It's his idea.
So, your name and address, please, sir.
He's going to tear the houses completely down?
That's an option that he has, but I believe so. Sir, could you give us your name and your address?
Name and address.
It's, see, I live...
So it's 168 North, 500 East, and it's Burt Warren.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I understand.
I can yell at you and still won't. But anyway, I live on my property runs east and west, right next to his apartments. And then Shaw's is on the bottom part. But my concern is mostly, a lot of it is the water. Because when they built the other 3 homes above that, good old Kaysville City was supposed to take care of the water situation. And Mr. Hyatt never followed through. And I brought it up quite a few times and nothing has ever been done. They brought in a 7-foot field. So here I am down here and everybody else is up here now. And then the apartments, are you gonna lower it any, or is it gonna be the same height as it is now?
A lot of that would be determined by access to sewer, how low you can go, and you've got to maintain drainage.
But I'm just concerned about the water that's going to run off onto me.
Yeah.
You know,
that makes
and
sense.
nobody's ever seemed to want to take care of it.
Now, so
except
your property's immediately to the south?
Yeah, it's
Right
here,
there,
this
okay.
building, and then those 3 new houses are behind, and he still get drainage from those houses behind.
Yeah.
That's
think-
where the houses is where they brought all the fill in. And then they put this stupid freeway wall through with 1,800-pound blocks of concrete in there. And everywhere there's a joint, the water comes through.
Sure, yeah.
But on the apartment side, as long as, I wouldn't care if they stayed one level, but if they're gonna up and build 2 stories, no. Because that's what happened to that second house there, is they was supposed to just stay the one level, well, they didn't. And so, out
See.
the door that went.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think they will make sure that when they do redevelop that they will address the drainage.
Okay, but one thing I'd like to see too is, make sure there's enough room to park, because, them people that's in there right now, there isn't a lot of room to be parking anything.
Right.
It's good to know.
Okay.
And, a nice fence would be down between us, because me and the guy that originally built the apartments put it, just a combination fence through there.
Right.
So, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think that is a concern with the other neighbors. She had wrote a letter, I don't know if you guys want or if you want me to read it. It's just about their concern about the housing and the structures. And also, they
Yeah,
just
if
said.
you have a letter, then,
Yeah.
yeah, if you could have that.
Yeah, we'll hold on to it on the record for you. But you're welcome to also summarize it if you'd like as well.
Okay. Oh, ma'am, could you give us your name? Well, we got you on the record now. People will say, who was that lady?
It's Shelley Warren, and I live at 168 North, 500 East.
Okay, thank you.
I'm George Sheffield at 134 North on 50 East, and I've lived there for 60 years. And when I built the house, had the house built there, they surveyed it from the south end. And when they built the next house to me, they come and says, hey, your house is on the property line. It can't be there. And so I'm concerned the way that's laid out across there with your yellow lines, you're infringing on property line on the back and on the sides because the footage is not in that block.
Yeah, it's not unusual from what I understand that, particularly in the older parts of town, that there's a lot of discrepancies with property lines.
Yeah, so I know it's going to interfere if they go from the north end and come this way. Bert's going to get clipped off instead of the fence line that's been there for 80 years when the owner put it in.
Yeah,
But
good
that's
point.
my concern.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sure, yeah, just.
So my name is Brian Frandsen. I live at 557 East, 100 North. So on the map there, my property's, just right there is where I'm located. So we've lived in that house for 15 years, and I've already experienced, one of the main reasons why I moved to Kaysville, especially the older part of Kaysville, was because I hoped that most of the development had already taken place since it was the older part as far as the residential piece. I understand that, in my profession, I do lending, I do commercial developments and construction developments and stuff like that. So I'm very familiar with the process and everything else. But again, one of the main reasons why I chose Kaysville, and particularly the older part, was I'd hoped that all the development had been done. Since I've been there, I watched those 3 houses directly behind me be developed, on it to 3. Kind of what Bert Warren said as well. My yard wasn't impacted by that because now those houses sit a lot higher than where the initial home sat. And so I've got a wall now going in the back of my property. There was quite a bit of difference in the grade. The other thing I was going to mention too is not counting the subject property, there are already 4 other duplexes within that neighborhood. And I know it had been mentioned that we need to have affordable housing and that every section of the city needs to have their fair share of rental properties and stuff. If you add in the subject property right now, that's 5 duplexes that are already there, or 8 or 12 units in one block area. I feel like that there's plenty of units already in a 1 block area that we don't need any more than that. You know, I know it's part of development, but I feel like that block, we've got our share. 12 is enough of units. I don't know if there's any other parts in the city that have that many units in a 1 block area that are separated in you know, multiple properties. There may be some that have located on 1 parcel that may have 8 units or 6 units, but I feel like that's quite a bit. And given those 8 properties, there's, like most rental properties, you have some that are maintained very well by the property owners, and you have others that struggle. One of the ones that is right in front of my property, I've seen police there frequently when previous owners owned it, so like I said, I'm kind of done with that piece of it. The other thing I wanted to mention too is, I know it was mentioned that the plan is to keep it affordable. Just doing some quick calculations here, you know, a cheap price per square foot, right now in order to meet that $200,000 price point, that would approximately put the price per square foot at $150 a square foot, which that's pretty cheap right now for the way that the residential building costs are right now. You'd have to do, I think, quite a bit of sweat equity to get it down that low, or have some friends that are in the industry. And that would translate to a unit size of about 1,332 square feet. Not a big unit. If you were to bump up your building costs to $200 a square foot, that would decrease the size of units to 1,000 square feet if you were seeking that $200,000 price range, which again is a very cheap price for a home in Kaysville. As all of us know, house values have increased dramatically in the last 10 years. You know, homes have still been selling very strong. I don't know if you can build a house for that cheap and still get that price point for that affordable housing. That's kind of my other concern about that piece as well. I feel like that when the last development went through, there was meetings with the Planning Commission and other things that just, you know, I appreciate the opportunity to voice my opinion as a neighbor, but I just felt like that maybe the residents there were maybe not represented the best. I know it has nothing to reflect upon the committee that's here tonight, because none of you were on the committee at that time, but anyway, like I said, to reiterate, I think that we've got our fair share of multifamily in a 1 block area. I don't think we need any more. And the point that was brought up where you had the issue with the easements on the 2 parcels, my answer to that is, I think when the property was initially developed, it wasn't developed with the idea of selling the 2 units separate, and that's why you don't need that. You wouldn't need that easement. They're meant to be together, and so that's, I think, the reason of saying, well, I couldn't sell my property because I couldn't get an easement on there. That probably wasn't the intent when the property was initially developed. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Dave Hill. I live at 589 East, 200 North, just across the street there. I live with her. I have a comment and a question. I realize most of my concerns and comments should really be addressed at a meeting where a new structure is being presented and concerns given on that, so I'll reserve those. But my comment, and if it's at all applicable, is that bus stop, that UTA bus line is a one-way trip. You can't go north from there very conveniently, and so if that matters, that's not a real good bus stop. My question is, and if it's appropriate at this point, is What does the new zoning allow that the current zoning does not?
We'll turn to Lyle, who's the most familiar with our code, and will give us a general rundown.
Yeah, as far as uses, they're extremely similar. Let me pull up my text here within your packet. So really, it's the primary distinction is density. So within the RM zone that's requested, single-family dwellings, multiple dwellings, again, it's up to that. It's based on a square footage, 1 unit for about every 2,800 square feet could be permitted. Parks, home businesses, pets, swimming pools, sheds. So those are things that are permitted that wouldn't have to come before the Planning Commission. That's pretty much true across the board for all of our R districts, including the RD zone. Again, other than that density question. Within the RD zone currently, the only thing that's permitted as far as dwelling units are single-family dwellings. Again, so it recognizes existing units, but I believe in the case of this one, if without a zone change, if they wanted to come back and redevelopment, it's a conditional use to continue to utilize the same number of units as are on site. So again, it would accommodate that and I think allow for redevelopment to continue to use for, but it would be a public process rather than a staff level process. That really is the crux of their short list in both zoning districts of what's permitted, but it essentially comes down to a density issue. You're not going to see businesses in one or the other that would be any different. It's just the same home occupations, household pets, farm animals, and things like that. There are no distinction or changes from the existing zoning to the new beyond how much and how many households could go on the site.
So really not a lot of difference, really. It's just mainly the number of units.
Yeah, I believe that is the distinction. So again, the same height, the setbacks are the same. The PRUD could allow for some flexibility on that. So the PRUD zone, which could be applied to both zoning districts, could allow for that flexibility, but that could hold true for the RD as well as the RM.
Right. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, seeing no further comments that are to be made, we'll turn back to the commission. We'll declare the public hearing closed unless there's an objection from any of the commission members. All right, we will declare the public hearing closed. Let's give Mr. Birmingham an opportunity if you would like to respond to any of the comments that were made. If not, that's fine as well. You good? All right. Then, commissioners, let's turn to us and have a discussion.
I have a question. Is there a way to require that if we recommend the project that a development agreement come before us?
Absolutely. So you could table this pending additional information, or also depending a specific development agreement.
Okay.
And you could ask for specific items to be in that. Come back with an agreement that says the homes will be turquoise and made of Adobe. So you can get extremely specific within that. The developer, of course, would have to agree to it, but if you'd like to give direction, if that's what you're interested in seeing, I think specifics are helpful in us preparing something to return to you. Another mechanism or means of doing that is if you feel comfortable with the general idea and you're not as concerned about the development agreement, you could say your recommendation to the city council would be for the rezone subject to a development agreement with items A, B, and C, and you wouldn't see it, but they could see it. So either method would be appropriate if you feel you need to see it in order to make a recommendation, or if you're ready to recommend to the council subject to that. Okay. Absolutely, either is appropriate.
Mm-hmm. So Tammy, what are you thinking?
I was just thinking that some great points were brought up in terms of, you know, a sign, or not a sign, a fence, and just some height kind of questions. Mm-hmm. I was also wondering about the drainage. I know that the city won't allow, I mean, can we require that also? Or recommend that to be
drainage is a consideration that should be being addressed when the site plan and the building permit is being applied for. So it should be being addressed at that point.
That a question? Yeah. So we do look at it, what's the benefit of this type of development, for example. So if you saw some detail with a development agreement and we're looking at buildings and a little more site detail, it's much easier to address. The example with the properties to the east, where it sounds like there's some issues. When we do a typical subdivision, we're very good at dealing with the water until a house comes in. And then you put a house in and it changes the whole layout of everything, and you're sloping water away from it and on and on. And perhaps the wall on this one maybe even predated the house and some of the problems. But so yeah, we do look at it on each development. But in particular, we're looking at those units kind of stand alone as they relate to building code, and that the drainage deals with that. But this could give an opportunity to see how it relates to surrounding properties, and it could give you a chance to see it as well if you desire to do so.
Okay, thanks.
From my standpoint, I mean, I think, this is something that we kind of see as an evolution of properties in a city, particularly when you have older properties and they've kind of outlived their useful life. And then you look at something else to be built there, and you kind of have to look at the conditions as they are and what the neighborhood is like and what the market's like and so on. And then you kind of take a look at what might be redevelopment. It's kind of the next step. And it's not that unusual that you see things like this happening in particularly older areas of a community. So the question that we, I guess, have, and then the council will ultimately have, is what's appropriate? What do they feel like would be appropriate to be there to kind of redevelop that neighborhood or the area that this is being proposed in? Okay, anybody else?
I have a question about a few things, a comment and a question, I guess, about the parcels and the lot line issue. If we just rezoned it RM, both parcels, could the applicant not just come back in the subdivision process, take care of any lot line issues? And I don't even necessarily see the need for an easement. If it was a PRUD, there would be some shared drive if they were facing each other. I don't know, maybe Lyle, the RM behind old Cosmos, where it's a similar configuration, are those for sale units, and how did they address the shared drives?
Yeah, so it would be possible simply through a subdivision process, either with the current zoning or through a new zone, to eliminate property lines, add easements, create common areas and access. So the buildings that are there today, there are ways to do that. Some of the issues would come from the setbacks and things, and that's where the PRUD would come into play, and probably in either scenario as an overlay on this. So as an example, the property that you're referring to behind the old Cosmos off Crestwood Road, which again, a similar lot size, similar configuration. You have two units that are facing, or two buildings with 3 units in each. What they have there is essentially the unit itself, the brick and mortar. Each unit is its own parcel ID. And then around that, the driveways, the grass area are all owned in common by an owners association. And so through that, they've granted cross-access easement. They all contribute to, participate in, and take care of the maintenance on that in that particular situation. So that could be applied similarly in this property as an option to correct the existing issues, but also under new development and the way it's platted. And that's the PRUD that would allow that to take place.
Well, and I think whatever the applicant proposes there, it seems like that would make sense, is just to completely reconfigure those lines.
Lyle, if you know this, I'll give you kudos, or if anyone knows this anecdotally, what are those units going for? Did anybody know?
I've not seen them listed, so I'm not certain.
I haven't either.
Okay.
I got to tell you, though, when I drive by there and I look down that driveway, it seems like a really narrow driveway.
It's tight.
With all those garages facing onto it, and thinking about backing out of there. That could be fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess I'll echo some of what you already said, Wilf. I think if we just look at this and say, really, if we're looking at a rezone, a large part of our consideration, I believe, should be answering the question of does this comport with the general plan? In fact, that's probably the majority of our consideration, I think. And I think the answer to that in this instance is yes, for, in my opinion, a number of reasons. One, it's on a major street. Two, it's revamping kind of what you already said, Wilf, an existing or outdated property that's maybe gone through its usefulness as it's currently used. You know, I do hear the comment about that there is already some multifamily over here in this area, and I think, as I've said in other instances, that's a relative term. If we go somewhere, say over by Mutton Hollow and Main Street, well, the density over there is significantly higher than here, than this area. And arguably, the roads are maybe relatively similar in terms of traffic. Main Street's probably a little higher, but I could be wrong. So if this were proposed a block south, my comment, I think, would be different. But I think where it's at, it makes a little more sense being right on 200 North. And then you just set the general plan compatibility aside and look at SB 34, and I think this is, if we're serious about trying to provide, you know, affordable, quote unquote, housing, this is an opportunity to do that. I think that the low 200s is probably wishful thinking, but I think if it's under 300 in Kaysville, there's no new construction that even sniffs the 200s in Kaysville right now.
Yeah.
So if it were 275 or 280 or something, I think, sadly in Kaysville, that's affordable. And I think that's probably where it would be at the low end, and maybe even into the low threes. This is a total guess. I have no idea. But long story short, I think there are concerns that can be addressed, and I think it'll be an upgrade, and I think it comports with the general plan, and I think it makes sense to rezone it.
I was going to say, I agree with everything you've said, but I do think 8 units would be way too dense there. And that would probably be stretching it, right, Lyle? According to the...
Yeah, my math doesn't get to 8.
Okay,
But,
right.
but again, with a survey or something, perhaps it's there. I would, for a couple reasons, based on the size of the property and what's permitted within the zone, but also just once you set it on there, with the example of the other one, it's tight, but once you get all of our other requirements in for fire access and things, and the extra units get harder and harder to fit. So I would think you're probably looking at 6 units if I were guessing.
6 is the maximum, okay. But I would also like to see a requirement that a development agreement come before either council or back to us, so that we can look at it and put some things in there that address the concerns that people have expressed. So,
Lyle, with the square footage, I mean, under the current zoning, multiple units are conditional. And as I look at that, it looks like they could get up to 6 units at this point with the existing zoning. Is that right?
Well, so I would maybe defer to the Planning Commission on interpreting that. So I'll read, just as you stated, it's listed as a conditional use within the existing zoning district. Multiple dwellings, not to exceed 6 dwelling units per building, legally existing upon the effective date of this chapter. So to me, if it's a pre-existing unit, if these were already 2 threeplexes, yes, they could replace them with 6 total units.
okay.
But perhaps I read it differently, and you know, I think the commission, you know, ultimately would have the final say on interpreting Title 17 of the zoning ordinance, if you feel that that's different.
So you're saying that it really doesn't allow more than what currently exists on the property?
That's my read on it. Yeah, I believe he could redevelop 4 units in a different configuration, but again, if the commission felt that perhaps the existing zoning would accommodate that based on your read, in 1713-4, number 1 there under conditional uses.
That's
page,
interesting, okay.
page 2 of that report. If you'd like
I just
to
look at that and I look at the requested zoning, and it didn't seem like it was that different in terms of how many units you could get on the property based on the square footage. But I guess you're right about what is the meaning of that first sentence. And then it looks like under the existing zoning, the RD zone, that it limits it to 6.
Correct.
That would be the maximum. Okay.
So, I mean, I'm looking at 17, 13.4. I mean, I think maybe this is what you were saying, Lyle. I think it's gray. I think you could interpret it to say, as long as you're under 6, you can, even if you had 4 like this, as long as you're under 6, and you can apply for a conditional use under the current zone. And then we would just be we would be answering the question, as we always do, is 2 additional units adding, detrimental impacts that we can put conditions on?
Mitigate.
Yeah, we can mitigate those things.
And maybe for, well, I'll read this first before I go out there. I was thinking the purpose of the chapter, again, as far as I know historically, and I don't know if that should play into my interpretation on it, but the way it talks about units existing prior to the date is, the story I've been told, and this predates my time with the city, is the existing zoning that's there was to not allow additional units unless they were new single-family homes into the zoning. Whether or not what's written actually reflects that and accomplishes that, but I think that plays into how I look at it and why at least we felt that the rezone would be necessary if they were going to try and do more.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the rezone is probably the better approach, but if I was trying to shoehorn a conditional use in, I think it's possible.
Yeah. That's what I was looking at as well, and I agree, I think. And the applicant has made that request, so that's what we'll deal with, is the request of a rezone. Tammy, what kinds of things were you thinking should be included in the development agreement?
A fence.
Okay.
For sure, a fence, and where's that email?
The letter?
Yeah, the letter, yeah, thanks. Well, and also just in terms of height, you said they could go up to 3 feet height, Lyle, depending on how it's configured to be under 30 feet?
Yeah, so all of our residential zoning districts have a 30-foot height limit. And the way that that's measured, it's to a midpoint of a roof. So if you have a pitched roof, it could go a little bit above that. So the architecture comes into play a lot with how that looks.
Okay.
If you're talking stories, we've had disappointed members of the public before that say, I just want a 2-story building. Somebody goes in and puts in 2 floors of 15-foot ceiling height. It's equally as tall as a 3-story building. So depending on what you're trying to accomplish, if you'd like it to, the development agreement can show architecture, and you'd ask for a similar product. You could limit it to stories. You could further limit the height.
Okay.
So yeah, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, 30 feet is at least the max, because that's already in place by the zone. You couldn't allow additional height through the development agreement.
And that would include the basement, right? Or not? That's just above grade?
Above grade.
So 3 stories above grade, potentially?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. So I think something that speaks to that.
Okay.
I think, because I do like higher density housing projects and areas, but maybe not 3 stories right there.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I do feel like it fits, though. I do feel like it fits.
Okay. Any other comments to discussion, commissioners?
I have a question, may I?
Commissioners, you all right allowing the applicant to come back up? Sure, Mr. Birmingham, come on up.
It's a question that follows on what you just asked, and that is the height measurement from grade or from curb. How do you determine that in the case of a PRUD?
Well, so it's a little difficult to explain on how we use it, but it's essentially an averaging of your grade. So you'll see buildings that can step down a property if it's on a hillside. And it doesn't distinguish. It's a final grade is where it's measured from, so not existing grade on where it's measured. But yeah, if you have different grades at different heights, we do averaging. As a simple way to state that is, as to how tall the building is in relation to the different points of the property. So not necessarily from the back of curb in that elevation.
Okay.
Thanks.
Anyone ready to make a motion?
How would I phrase it if I wanted to include the development agreement?
We can help you out.
Oh, can you help me?
Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay, okay. Let's see, let me find it here. Go back over. Okay, I'll make a motion to recommend approval of, let's see, approval of a rezone at 520 and 540 East, 200 North, from residential, from RD to RM, to include the PRUD overlay and some sort of a development agreement, right? A development
Sure.
agreement to be reviewed by planning or city?
If you'd like us to review it, you can certainly include that in your motion.
Okay, to be reviewed by the planning commission.
So before it goes on to the council, you'd like to have it brought back here. And then, do you want to mention some of those items again that you were?
Oh, yes, to include a fence and some sort of limitation on the height, on the stories, I guess, above grade.
And you're thinking essentially 3 stories is too high?
Yes,
So limit maybe to 2 stories?
yeah.
Okay, anything else?
Well, and a 6-unit max, well, I guess 8 doesn't even fit, so that probably is a moot point, never mind.
So can I clarify then, are you saying that you're recommending it to the council, but before it goes to council, you want to see the development agreement? Or are you saying go to the council, if they approve it, it has to be with a development agreement? That's your recommendation?
I'd like to see the development agreement.
Before council even
before
sees
council.
Okay, so
So,
she would recommend, I think she's
Is that what-
recommending, making a motion to recommend approval with a development agreement that contains some of these issues, and that the planning commission review that before the motion is forwarded on to the council.
Can I just ask, why can't you include the things that you're concerned about and tell the council that you're concerned about those things, and tell the council that you want a development agreement? That's a motion
Okay.
that I would
Okay.
vote for.
okay, that's fine, make that.
So
amendment.
modify
makes
it to
sense?
that?
Modify that, yeah.
So the recommendation would be for the approval of the rezone with a development agreement addressing, at minimum, these items to be reviewed by, or to be sent on to the council for their review.
Yeah, so I guess then the question is, what are those specific things? Did you already mention them all? I guess the fence,
You did.
okay, the height, and that's
Height,
really it?
fence, mhm.
Okay.
What about drainage? Did somebody, or is that part of it, consideration already, or?
Yeah, and with drainage, I mean, they should be already under the city's requirements. They should be addressing the drainage and making sure that it doesn't cause problems on other properties. And I don't know that we necessarily need to specifically address that, but if you feel comfortable doing that, I mean, we can certainly include it.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the
How about
concerns.
the number of units? Were you concerned
Oh,
with
yeah,
8?
and the, well, because you said 8's not gonna work, right?
I don't think it will. I'd have to verify it. Again, it comes down to the survey, the total property area, and what the ordinance would allow. So the applicant seemed to think that there may be enough square footage to do that. So if you'd like to allow it to just go with whatever the zoning permits, that's one option. Or if you feel that it is necessary to specifically restrict it to no more than X,
Okay.
that could be part of the agreement.
Do you think that's necessary?
I don't think it is, but it's also not a problem if you want to include it.
Okay, go ahead and include that as well, Josh. Can you restate my motion?
You got it. Add that on there.
Okay, add that on there. Are we clear on what it was?
All right, so we have that motion. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Second. Any other discussion by the commissioners? Now's the time if you have any other items you want to add on, or if anyone would like to make any kind of a substitute motion, this is the time to do it. That's kind of why I'm leaving it open right now for discussion before we start the vote. Anything else from any of the commissioners on this? All right, normally we do a roll call vote. So we'll begin with our new commissioner.
Aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. This will, for the audience, what this means now is that this will go on to the city council for their consideration, at which time I think they will also entertain taking comments from the public. And Lyle, do we have an idea when that might go to the council?
The most likely date based on their meeting schedule is probably the 5th of September.
Okay.
And that would give time for preparation of the development agreement. They meet next week, and then they meet the first Thursday of September, so that would be the case anyway.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. Let's move on to our next item. We dealt with the difficult one first. I'm kidding, folks. Yeah, thank you. Our next item is a public hearing for rezone of 25.34 acres at 700 South Deseret Drive from the GC General Commercial Zone to the LI Light Industrial and the R2 1 and 2 Family Residential Zoning District, also to include a planned residential unit development overlay, PRUD, for the applicant Phil Holland. Lyle, we'll turn to you first.
Yeah, I'll give a brief introduction on some of the key points with this item, and then again, the applicant, Mr. Holland, is here this evening to provide you with additional detail. The property, for point of reference, is directly south of Boondocks, between Deseret Drive and Interstate 15. 25 acres of property that sits between the residential neighborhood to the south, the freeway, the major road, and then you got our commercial zoning to the north of it. It is currently zoned as a general commercial district. Retail, office, and a number of uses are primarily what you would find within that. And what the applicant is requesting, here's a zoning map that again just reflects the surrounding zoning, an R120 zoning designation in brown, which is typically a 20,000 square foot lot, roughly half acre, 2 units per acre zoning designation. Most of the development, well, in fact, the old mill subdivision is done under a PRUD, so most of the lots are smaller than that because they do compensate for some of the density with common open space, trails, and other things within that. But just to give some reference as to what type of housing is surrounding it, 30-acre lots is, give or take, the crux of it. The developer's proposal is to take the property and kind of split it in half to do 2 different things. And so they're proposing to do a residential subdivision on the west and southern end of it. You'll see over the property about 60 units of residential on about 12 acres of property. And we can talk a little bit more. I'll leave it to the applicant to explain what type of housing that looks like, what type of product, if the commission wishes to chat with them on that, you might expect. The layout you can see here has 2 access points onto Deseret Drive and essentially a loop around a block created in there is all the residential product. To the north, what the applicant is requesting is the LI Light Industrial Zoning District. They're very similar within Kaysville, the light industrial and general commercial zones. We don't necessarily have a heavy manufacturing or heavy industrial designation, but there are some distinctions between the two of note for the consideration of the commission. One of them primarily that we dealt with previously on this site was there's no architectural requirement under the light industrial zone like there is in the general commercial zone. So the city's ordinance has a building design standard that applies to our commercial districts. It isn't necessarily applicable to the LI. The applicant can speak to this a little bit. He is willing to build to those standards with some of the product that they're proposing. So the other difference and reason for the request is there are uses within the LI district that are also, many of which allowed within the GC zone, but as a conditional use. And so one of the primary reasons for the request of the rezone was in fact to make it easier to get tenants in and reduce some of the process that might be needed for some of the users to come into the property. And they can speak to that further. They've got a few different use types, office, flex space type construction found in these 2 large buildings. You would see office and residential up against Deseret Drive. But there is a component of storage units as well that they can address on about a little over 3 acres of the property. The developer has put together a development agreement together with this, essentially to assure that the layout, the number of units wouldn't go past what's shown, stating that they're willing to keep to those architectural standards, and those types of details are found within that agreement. Again, we're looking at another rezone. So this is one where, again, as a commission, you get a lot of discretion on how you feel it fits within our general plan for this particular site in the area. And we're looking for a recommendation again from you this evening to pass along to the City Council, who would make the final decision. I'll cut my comments there, but be happy to take any questions from the Commission as you have them, and remind you it is a public hearing once you've heard from the applicant to receive comments from the public.
Any questions by the Commission members of Lyle? Okay. Let's go to the applicant now, Mr. Holland.
Thank you very much. My name is Phil Holland, and I live at 1082 West Dutch Lane in Kaysville, Utah. So, this property has had quite the history, as you know. You have been approached even this year from a different applicant on this site, and it actually got approved through the Planning Commission. It got tabled at the City Council level back in late winter, and here I am. So Lyle did a great job of explaining some of the dynamics of this. I wanted to touch on a few of them briefly. So the big thing for me is the commercial use here. We have just under 100,000 square feet shown in those blue buildings, and we actually have demand right now for more than half of that. Of course, it's not approved yet, so we're trying to get through that process, but we have basically half of this commercial property pre-leased. Of course, there's no lease agreements, but the pre-demand is there, which for me is a big deal. A couple of these businesses are here locally. One of them is a national headquarters that's located here that is looking at the front building. I'm going to speak a little bit in secret code just because it is a public hearing and these groups have not come out and said, I'm here. We have had several different meetings with the mayor and staff, but as a resident of Kaysville, this is always what we want to see. We want to see commercial development. Cities both to the north and to the south, for as long as I've been a Kaysville resident, for almost 40 years, they've been taking all the commercial development. It's important for us as a city to have sites that people can develop. One of the main reasons, Lyle mentioned this earlier, because of the general commercial zone that it currently is, we're asking to rezone that. Now, why would we do that? The main reason is that the approved uses under the LI zone outnumber the GC zone. In fact, the general commercial allows for office or retail. So if all of us wanted to set up a business that made hats, and we stamped hats, and we warehoused those hats before we manufactured them and we sent them out, we'd have to go through some sort of a conditional use permit under the GC zone. These buildings, do you have that rendering up? These are renderings that will be similar to these facilities. Kaysville City right now is absolutely leading northern Utah in the demand for this type of product. We have great retail uses that want to be here that are destination. We have one national group that is a recreational use that has sent me multiple LOIs, letter of intents. And so there's a tremendous amount of buzz around this property right now, and we're excited about it. Our first step is the rezone. Also, Lyle mentioned this, the light industrial architecture and the building uses aren't as aggressive as the general commercial, but we want to, including metal buildings. You can have a metal building in light industrial. Our development agreement specifically states that we are
saying, we're okay if you give us or require us to do the architecture that is required in the general commercial. Which for me, I live a couple blocks from this site, that's important. Another topic that, will you go back to the site plan, Lyle? Is storage units. This is not my brainchild. We actually, on a prior iteration of this site plan, had the mirror image of that. Which button do you press here? Red. It had the mirror image of this building right here. And as we met with staff and city officials, an idea was brought to us of, well, if we're going to rezone this property potentially, then what if we reused or relocated some location property within the city to this spot? And I said, okay, well, that seems like quite the endeavor. Luckily enough, I know the owner of the property, and they agreed, and we in turn put it in the development agreement that we would scrap a certain use here in Kaysville City on 200 North that is a great commercial retail use. They would repurpose that site retail, and they would move that use out here. I think that's extremely important. Otherwise, I would say I don't want to do storage units. But I think for the greater good of the city, that's probably the right move. But like I said, that's not my brainchild. I think that that would be something that later on at a city council level would very much be a part of what they would like to see. So if the dialogue takes you to that point where, do we really want storage units in this spot? That is the purpose of it. And that, if you've gone through that development agreement and it talks about that, that's what we're talking about there. So that's really the high-level topics of this. The residential, I believe it was approved in late February, early March by the Planning Commission. It has changed since then. Maybe let me give you just some quick highlights. So a couple of the differences, back when it was originally approved, I think there was about 12.5 acres of commercial on this site. Now there's more like 13.5, so there's more commercial. The previous applicant wanted 5.8 units per acre. I'm down to 5.5. And the site plan that was approved, or as part of the rezone, they had 69 lots, mine's 66. So from a residential perspective, we're not trying to maximize here. We think it is a great residential property. It fits perfectly as a buffer to this neighborhood as well as this neighborhood. These lots, and I actually did a lot of research on public hearings, minutes. We talked to the previous applicant, and we have tried to integrate all of those items that were big key points to the public, including, the circulation on this road, keeping the larger lots right next to the larger lots. This is our open space area. So some of those things that we've implemented in our plan that had been a previous issue or concerns by the public. I look forward to your dialogue, and if there's any questions, I could definitely come back up or answer them now.
Commission members, any of you have questions for the applicant?
Yeah.
Okay,
I have a couple questions. Okay, so my first question would be, which do you plan to develop first? The commercial or the residential, or?
So, yeah, I think this building right here, as part of groups that want to grow their building and they need a new place to be, this is right away. We also have language in the development agreement that would say that this certificate of occupancy. I forget the exact language.
We'll go in first.
But our preference is to, right out of the chutes, we need to start building this. The demand is there and staring us in the face.
And what do you envision in this building?
Which one?
Well, the front, the one
The first
facing
one,
the
building
first
one?
one, yeah, building one, yes.
This one here?
Mm-hmm.
So that's, we've designated it, and on this site plan, it's designed for a certain group here in Kaysville that is in the business park right now. They're a tech company.
Okay.
Lyle could tell you who they are later in a non-public hearing
Okay.
platform. But it is a national headquarters that is a business we want to keep here in the city.
Okay.
And so that is theirs.
Okay, and then who will build these residential?
Undetermined.
Oh, okay.
We've had, including the previous applicant has showed demand, but we haven't said one way or another who's going to do them.
Okay.
Other questions?
So, see if I understand what you're saying. What was of high demand that you were saying in terms of the commercial use? These three type buildings, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
So if then, I mean, I could probably guess the answer, but explain why you wouldn't want to go, if it's such high demand, then you just go for all of it and not rezone it. Is it just the residential brings more money?
That's an aspect of it. Another aspect of it is Kaysville does have a healthy portion of this. And I mentioned earlier that the mecca right now of this type of use is within our city. And so if you build too much of it, so let's say, for example, we echo this building right here and we add 3 other buildings right here, then I think that you almost have too much of it. And so in a down market, this becomes a riskier play because of its access than, say, the Kaysville Business Park. And so we think that we're introducing the right amount to this location, both in its access and then both in its competition level with other similar type uses.
So you would also, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, this is just essentially a continuation of the same type of use and users as the business park?
Yes.
Right.
And on that same note, we have similar uses that are extremely interested. There's a building right here that was recently done where Taylor's Boats is, Climate. Very similar type uses have requested, you know, I have an LOI from one of them saying we would love to be there. So the demand is there, but we don't want to oversaturate that market with additional product. 100,000 square feet is quite a bit for that spot.
And how willing are you to give more details on this storage unit arrangement?
Yes. Sorry. Lyle, can you pull a picture for us so that we can just, you know, show people sort of the deal?
Yeah, so
Storage units on 200 North.
I do not know what you're talking about, no. Yeah, I'm going to kind of beat around the bush just because this isn't, we still have a long ways to go. Our dialogue right here is I'm up to bat.
Okay.
But back in the dugout, we've been talking about, oh wow. Do you have a Google Earth on that?
I will soon.
So I can't see that far. So there is a property around Arby's that the owner of that property would love to relocate his use over to what we're doing today. That is 100% what it is.
So, and then redevelop that property there where those currently are by Arby's
Yes.
into something else?
Okay.
Now, because that isn't, you know, just what we're doing today is first base, or up
Right.
to bat even. that is the idea. So if they get that rezoned, storage units are allowed in the LI zone. They are a permitted use, but we are showing it saying that the only way we're doing that is if that group right there repurposes their site and goes in that location.
Okay.
And I think we even have something in there that states, in the development agreement, that states within 30 days of them getting a certificate of occupancy for those new storage units, they will need to repurpose their site. Maybe not necessarily get a new user there, but take away the current use that's there.
So translated, that means there won't be storage units there anymore, right?
That's
Okay,
the idea,
okay,
yeah.
Okay, good. Just so we're all clear
Yeah.
on what we're doing. Okay. All right. I really appreciate the fact that you've listened to the minutes from other meetings and taken into account all of the, recommendations from the community. And have you done any outreach for this project?
Yeah, we have talked to residents in this area, and then I did feel that we had a pretty good gauge on what people's issues were.
Was your feedback pretty positive then? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that it's positive. I think that what they liked was this buffer idea. And frankly, if I lived in this house right here, this would be what I'd like to see, is that, you don't have some of those commercial uses. In the current zone, you could actually get a hotel right here. And having developed around hotels, that would be the worst case scenario for these people right here. But I could go do that today if the demand were there.
Okay.
Other questions? Okay, Mr. Hull, thanks.
Thanks.
We'll open the public hearing portion of the meeting now. And again, I think most of you were here when we talked about coming forward and making your comments about this proposal. Please try to be succinct and brief. Again, we don't have as many people here that I think we need to worry about time limits, but we do reserve the right to put time limits on if we do find that we're running short on time and need to move along. But otherwise, I think feel free to make the comments that you do need to make and that you want to make, but let's try to not get out of here too late and keep your comments fairly brief. With that, any of you who are interested in coming forward to comment, please come forward, state your name and address, and then give us your comments. No one?
Easy.
My name is Brian Altum. I live at 444 Cornfield Circle, which is the first cul-de-sac directly south of the property. My question, I guess, I love the residential idea. I worked a lot with Ivory Home and had a lot of conversations with them in their previous application. It went through Planning Commission twice, never got tabled at council, got denied both times. I'm just wondering, the first time was with light industrial, the second time was with general commercial. Why do we think it's any different this time? Storage units were proposed on the second application through the previous applicant. As a resident, I don't like the idea there. And I recall the council didn't like that idea necessarily either. The residential looks almost identical to the applicant before. But again, I don't understand. There's not enough of a difference here that I don't know why it would go through this time when it hadn't gone through twice.
Thank you. Any other comments? I will say that we have received a couple of emails. I believe all of the commission members have seen them. Were you all able to get those? And the comments were generally along the lines of some of the things that were said previously, which that this was a an area, one of the last large commercial areas left in the city, and that they did not really want to see that opportunity for commercial tax base to not happen. And some other comments about some other things, but I think mainly that's what that was reflecting. Any other recollection from you all? So just so everyone's aware that we have received those emails, and they'll be entered into the record as comments as well. Anyone else? Should we do the auction thing, going once, going twice? All right, unless there's objection from the commission, we will close the public hearing portion of this. Mr. Holland, would you like to come up and summarize or respond to the comments?
Yeah, just briefly, I agree with him on the storage. As crazy as that sounds. But the only reason we're doing that is we have a better corner in the city that will get us better tax base, and one of the only ways that those guys can, you know, get rid of that is to move them somewhere else. The beauty of this piece is, and one of the differences, and I was actually in that planning commission when they talked about the storage units. This is a Kaysville storage unit that we will, not me personally, but the user will demolish as soon as he gets them up here. So we're not adding new storage to the city. That's important to me as a resident. I don't want them any more than the next guy. But if we can get an A location within this city, redevelop it, that's the important part.
So, okay, so that's, I mean, are we, oh,
yeah.
Okay, so that, I mean, that's actually, that's where my mind was, and that's actually pretty convincing to me, because although I do want to flesh out a little bit more. So, hypothetically, strong hypothetically, we're talking about these units by Arby's. Are we, you said corner, are we also talking Domino's and the parasailing building?
Oops.
Just the Domino's, the pizza joint that may be around Arby's, and then the storage facility for now.
Okay.
So that's the landowner that is repurposing that spot, and if he puts a couple of other properties around him, great. He's a commercial developer, very bright guy. Then it would be even better. But he could actually use that acre right there on the corner, and it'd be an amazing corner for the city.
Yeah, so I guess that's maybe my question with your developer vision / sales pitch hat on. What, I mean, I'm not committing you to anything, and if there is something, great. But what user would that size of a lot accommodate? Because it seems pretty narrow. You get the parasailing when it gets a little bigger and better. But where Domino's is, I just don't know if it's wide enough. And before maybe you answer, I'm saying if that was, this is where I agree with you, and I think it's convincing. If that was usable by a much heavier tax benefit user than this, then the argument that some people say, which is let's not lose commercial tax base, kind of flies out the window a little bit, because this is a property where you will get less sales tax, or less tax base than if you swapped for that property. That property would probably double or more, and this is total guess, in tax base than what something would go on here. So that's where I'm like, if I could have an idea that was going to bring in something that would bring in a lot more tax base, then it's easier to make the argument that to lose some commercial here.
I totally follow your logic, and that's exactly where my mind goes. And the only way I would introduce that use out here is because that's a better use. Mm-hmm. And that isn't my idea. That's somebody else's idea. I've basically hitchhiked onto that idea and said, yeah, that's actually a great thing for the city. Let's figure this out. Yeah. So there's been a lot of legwork, and I do want to say, because it is a public hearing, or is that over?
It's closed, but you're still on the record.
But we are on the record. I do want to say that none of this has been finalized.
Right.
The intent from all parties is there. And so as we get up to bat, I've mentioned that before, that is the intent of all the parties as we get together. That's a lot of legwork that has happened, you know, behind the scenes, but that's what we're trying to do. And I think you stated it just perfectly well. General commercial in all those public hearings I watched and witnessed on this site, they totally beat up the site from a commercial perspective. Now, I totally disagree with it not being viable. It just needs to be thought out. It needs to be processed. The commercial needs to, and you mentioned this, the commercial might need to be the first aspect of this project, not necessarily the residential. I think that goes back to what Mr. Altum suggested, is what's the difference? I do develop residential, I do develop commercial. For me, this is a commercial project. It just so happens to have a residential component to it. Mm-hmm. I think that's the difference.
Mm-hmm. Why can't you do what you are proposing here under general commercial with the exception of the storage units?
Let me just read you, because that is it's a great question.
Are you looking at development agreement?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm looking at
the zoning code.
By the way, we need to address this at one point. After looking at these two zones for the last 18 years, you guys know them better than me, but the general commercial, the permitted uses, offices, number one, offices, number two, retail sales and services, and three, government offices and services. So that's pretty bland, and it leaves a lot of room for who knows what.
Yeah.
The light industrial, the language is still semi-bad, just in my humble opinion.
This could be said for a lot of our ordinances.
Yes, you're preaching to the choir.
Yeah. That's good to hear. But the reason the LI zone is 1 through 9, there's 9 uses that are allowed. And for the most part, the demand right now in the marketplace fits into a lot of these. Offices is still there, printing and publishing, warehousing, wholesale trade and distribution. We have a handful of online groups here in our city that would love warehousing space where they can drop ship whatever they want. LI allows that. Electrical appliances, another major one is, I saw it earlier, I think it was construction. Where did that run off to? But that type of a thing, if I'm a contractor and I build mantles and railings, you know, I want 5,000 square feet, I want a bay at the end, and I can use that space and take my mantles and my railings and go put them in Ovation Homes, great homes. So that's who we're targeting. That's who's, like I said earlier, this is the mecca of that type of person. And we just so happen to be fortunate to have great Kaysville businesses that want to expand and be in this space as well, that are more tech driven. But that was a long-winded answer to your question. Sorry about that, but
I get it.
Other discussion?
I was just going to say, so I was opposed to doing anything with the site because we weren't sure, you know, what it could be. But I really like this. I really like this plan. For a couple of reasons. I think that you've incorporated all of the suggestions made in previous conversations and previous meetings, but also the fact that you're willing to put the commercial, make it a commercial project with residential, I think is great. And the trade-off that we're going to get. You know, like Josh said, we're so concerned about tax revenue, and we've looked at this site many times hoping for something better to come along, something that will benefit the city as a whole in a better way. And I think that this does that, especially, you know, with the trade-off for the storage units and the property on Second North becoming available for someone to do something, or maybe the developer that already owns it will do it. I don't know. I'm not sure, but I think it's a good project.
Lyle, the previous rezones that were considered by the council on this property, the council actually took action to deny them.
I know for sure they did on one. I believe on both that they did end up doing that. The applicant originally on the first attempt through requested 25 acres of RM zoning.
Right.
And it morphed through the process of what that ended up looking like. And then the second application was similar to this. However, it was 5 acres commercial. And forgive me for rounding numbers as I'm guessing a little bit. I think 10 acres with the light industrial and 13 acres with the R2. So yeah, a lot of similarities, but ultimately the council, the reasoning being, I think they had some concerns with the commercial element of the project as it was proposed.
And we
did deny it.
We recommended approval, our body, of the second one, correct?
Yeah, I believe the recommendation from the Planning Commission was approval of the residential component, the user that would have been on the LI zone, which was a recreation user, but not in favor of the 5 acre storage unit at the time. So I think the recommendation was positive with that exception, is my recollection.
So I'm recalling somewhat. I actually would flip-flop what in my opinion, I'm on the opposite side of what the council would have done or what the council did do, because the council approved a rezone of losing commercial at Angel and 200 North, not long or relatively close to the same time as this last one came that we recommended, this last application here. And I think, my opinion is that we should have tried to keep that residential, as I had already said in the meeting, keep that residential down on Angel and 200 North, because I think when West Davis Corridor comes in, that becomes more valuable, arguably even than this. And so I'm more comfortable losing it here, and I wish we would have kept it there, whereas I think they said, we'll lose it there and keep it here. So I'm on the opposite side of that, and that's why I think I would lean in favor of recommending this as it's proposed.
You want to make a motion?
I recommend that we I make a motion that we recommend approval of a rezone of 25 acres at 700 South Deseret Drive from GC to LI as it's proposed, with the development agreement as proposed, particularly the exchange of storage unit properties.
Okay.
Second.
And there's a second. Any other discussion by the commission? Any comments?
What?
Just as for my own sake, on the motion, including the residential in there. I think you touched on the rezone of the GC to LI.
So I'll clarify. Yeah, I mean, as proposed, including the residential component.
So, say it again, Josh. So making a motion is to rezone as proposed, or?
Yes.
Essentially.
Every aspect of it.
Yeah.
But just to put a finer point on it, it's very critical that storage unit component, because as I explained before, I think it makes sense, the exchange of
right.
Losing tax base here, gaining a better one there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So that's specially called out.
It's already in there. I just want to make it clear.
Okay. And we have your second. Any other comments from any of the commission members? Any discussion? All right, then let's go ahead with the vote. Tammy, you're first.
Aye.
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 All right, motion passes. This will go on to the City Council for their consideration now, at which time I think they'll be holding a hearing on this as well. Lyle, are we expecting the same date?
Yeah, I believe the most likely date was that September 5th meeting as the other.
All right, thank you very much. All right. Anybody need a break? Or do you want to just push through? Push through, all right.
Push through.
Item number 4 is a public hearing, another public hearing. And a preliminary plat approval for the cottages at Harvey Estates at 1955 West, 200 North. Capital Reef Management, Mr. Brad Frost is the applicant. Lyle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, by way of introduction to this, the Planning Commission may recall the property. This was recently before you under consideration for a rezone. It's just over 5 acres of property east of Angel Street on the south end of 200 North. The applicant have requested an R2 zoning designation with the PRUD in order to accommodate small lot single family development for active senior, I believe is the term, community. This is the concept plat that was proposed at the time with the rezone, showing the general layout, the access onto 200 North as the streets push through in a cul-de-sac lot development. We've been working with the applicant on the preliminary plat, and you'll see that it's very similar to the concept that was proposed. Some of the lot sizes have been adjusted, including an increase in common open space in order to meet some of those requirements. We've been working through details with irrigation, utility capacity, some of the generic questions on ensuring that it can be serviced. There are still some details on those to be worked out with the final plat. Typically, all the detailed engineering and confirmation on it we won't have done with the preliminary plat, but we've been able to confirm that there are the capacities and abilities to service the subdivision as proposed and different ways of doing so. With that, you see the plat here before you is staff's review. Apologize, I'm skipping between notes here for you. Staff's recommendation as far as the preliminary plat was that, again, it's 21 units, 22 lots, excuse me, on the 5.5 acres, ranging from 6,700 square feet to 19,000 and change in size. That connects the streets and is consistent with the development agreement and that which was approved with the rezone. And thus staff's recommending that the Planning Commission forward a recommendation to the City Council, and they get the ultimate say again on these with the preliminary plat. Our recommendation just wanted to ensure that as part of that, when we get to the final plat, that we ensure that the traffic medians, which are called out within the development agreement, are identified and the specific details of those approved at that next step. They're kind of on here, but it's kind of hard to see some of the detail, and they are beholden to them already by an agreement, but don't want that to be forgotten. So with that, we'll turn it over to the Planning Commission for any questions, and the applicant is here this evening as well to present additional detail.
Commissioners, any questions of Lyle? So Lyle, you say this is consistent with what was discussed at the rezone, and pretty much meets the requirements of the city with regard to the subdivision requirements.
Correct. Yeah, it's consistent. It meets those requirements that were outlined within the development agreement. Mm-hmm. Again, some of the engineering and final details will still be figured out before we bring it back for final plat. But we have been able to confirm with the utility providers and the like that essentially the layout works, the lot sizes and general layout are per our findings of staff within the parameters allowed with the zoning district that's been applied.
Okay. No other questions, Commission? Then let's ask Mr. Frost to come on up and give us any information that he would like to present.
I'm going to cut your evening short. I don't have a whole lot to share other than last time we had a couple great meetings with the City Council and visits with neighbors, and this is what we have. So, and we are supportive of traffic measures, as that was a big concern, and so we'll work through that in the final plat. But other than that, unless you have any questions, be happy to answer.
Commissioners, any questions of the applicant?
Well, this is
okay, thank you. We'll go to the public hearing portion of the meeting now. Open that up for comment from anyone who would like to address the commission on this preliminary plat approval. Again, please keep your comments consistent and brief. We welcome you now to come on up. Please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments.
Yeah, I'm Dave Johnson. We live on Angel Street, 62 North Angel Street, and our property borders on the west end of this subdivision right here. We've been down there since '73, so we've seen a lot of changes since since we were there. And Mr. Foster's reached out to me on some of the concerns that we have. There's 5 people that use irrigation water that comes down through the center of that property. Right now the irrigation water is running 24/7 through there, and the 5 of us that use it there use it from Friday at 5 o'clock till Sunday night at 5 o'clock, and then we turn it back down the main ditch, and down below it's used to water those cornfields, and he uses it the rest of the time as it goes down there. And I've talked to Mr. Frost. They are going to work on trying to and keeping that irrigation water there. The other thing we talked to him about a fence. We have horses on that property, and right now in West Kaysville, kids are kicking out the vinyl fences, running at them, make holes in them and stuff. So we've talked about doing some kind of an upgrade to the fencing there, and we would participate on any cost that was to upgrade that. And then the other concern, the sewer, the way they have coming down that property line, if they come down the property line, it takes out, that's solid trees right there. It probably would be hard for them to do, I don't know, but that's, the ditch is on the ditch is partly on our property, a little bit goes into Harvey's, and the fence that we have there is nailed to the trees, goes in and out of the trees to keep the horses in. We talked to Stan years ago about buying some property, like 5 feet, to put a good fence up there, and that was when we maybe could afford it. I don't know if we could now, but as expensive as it is. And then, yeah, just maybe look if there's some other options for the sewer. I went and talked to the sewer district today to see if there was some other options. So that's our only concern. We don't want to lose the trees, but the trees are mostly on Harvey's property and the ditch is on ours. So someday when Harvey's sell that corner, we probably will. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Michael Halls, 1749 West, 75 South. We live on the street that will be connected through. Just kind of backing up, the area the irrigation ditch is going to run down has probably the most trees in that particular area. The end of it is actually a federally recognized wetland that was mapped out when they did the West Davis corridor. Both property owners would really like that moved to the north alongside the road. Right now on the maps it doesn't necessarily have that. The other concern obviously is that it irrigates this property. Let's see which button it is right here. It wasn't clear on the plat whether or not we actually can retain access to that ditch so that we can actually water that. That's the Einfeld's property right there. Sorry, frog in my throat. Another one is the residents along this side. They're concerned. There was talk about bringing access for construction through 200 North until basically they had occupancy. They would like to put a construction barrier here so they didn't have large amounts of stuff, especially when it was earth moving equipment coming in and out. The other one is if you put in Google Maps and you type 1700 West, 200 North, that's the address. This street as 1700 West has always been a little bit of an oddball. It's very difficult to get anybody to deliver anything to. If you're going to do that, we might as well rename the street as well, as long as the neighbors could agree on something like that. The other one is in the development or in the statutes, there's a bubble right here that will need to be removed. The developer is supposed to bear the cost of that. I'm not sure that we've got an agreement on that side of it. In addition, with the application, this is administrative. The code is pretty clear. A preliminary subdivision shall be accompanied by, and it goes through quite a bit of items. Some of the concerns is that it is supposed to include parks, common open spaces, and playgrounds. There is a historic property. It's made by that nice Ward, Orange Brick. It was the first schoolhouse, we believe, in West Kaysville. There was an intent to talk to the new historic preservation group that was formed by the City Council to talk about the disposition of that property. We don't have any actual idea, given that it's still in this common area, what it'll be used for or if it'll be preserved at all. That would be something that we would like to see before, obviously, this is decided. The other one is that the Planning Commission has the option of requiring a professional landscaping plan. With the split median, there was a lot of talk about that, using it as a traffic calming feature, making sure that it looks like a neighborhood that you're entering and not necessarily a through street. We would really hope that you would go through and actually ask for that. The other one is most of the common area is this little retention basin at the end, not really what you would consider in a PRUD zone as the most the idea of what the common open space was supposed to be. It's possible that a landscape architect could turn it into something that was not just a space, but actually a place, something that would be actually meaningful between the two. The other one is the landscaping plan would also include more detailed topographic maps. The developer represented that the water table he suspected in this area was pretty high, which is why patio homes were desirable versus other single-family units. If, for example, that is a retention basin that goes into the existing water table, it's possible the bottom of that is not going to be anything other than wet. If you remember down at the Wellington Drive, there was another retention basin that was fully landscaped, but it ended up being very wet. Phragmites ended up growing up in it, and they ended up having to pave the entire thing over. It was a big mess. We'd like to avoid that. And in addition, you know, they're looking at expanding that once the next subdivision comes in. So we'd like to not have a mosquito breeding retention pond in the area. The other one is preliminary elevations. A lot of the neighbors were concerned about the preliminary elevations, how the homes would be, how different they would be. There's no representations in the application, as there should be. The other one is the utilities. You know, the city said they work better in loops. We would agree. Secondary water runs up this street. There is on the plat a connection to primary water, but as you know, as they've done this development and we've got in here, we effectively are at the end of a very long one-way thing for secondary water. Water pressure has dropped pretty dramatically in the area. One of the areas that we were kind of hoping for is to connect into secondary so that we would basically complete a loop through here, and that would solve some of the water pressure issues that we've had. And then the last thing is the entrance area. Obviously, even if without a landscape plan, if there's signage or lighting or other types of stuff, it would be nice to kind of know what was going on there. And then the last is we asked the developer for the CCNRs. A lot of the application was approved based on the active adult lower density, the impact on traffic and other stuff. I think everybody likes the plan. There are people in our neighborhood who want to move in, very interested in what the CCNRs will be. Mm-hmm. You know, a CCNR for an active adult community can be anything from, you know, 2 adults over 55 to a 55-year-old with his second wife and all their adult children and their spouses who are struggling financially, right? So we'd be kind of interested in that. There's also, you know, how long on-street parking. Obviously, some of the neighbors are concerned if you can't do on-street parking here, that the solution is, well, the homeowners association won't let me do it. I'll just drop the cars over here. And then, you know, other things with pets, how many pets and other types of stuff. Like I said, we asked, the developer said he didn't want to provide that because he didn't want it in the stuff. It's required in the development agreement before it's approved. So given that this is administrative, it doesn't seem like the application is really complete. We've got a lot of outstanding questions. I would just kind of hope you would table it, you know, have those things put in that are required so we can bring them back and have a good discussion about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is, sorry, my name is Steve Einfeld. I live at 1670 West, 200 North. And I also own the property at 37 West, or 37 South Angel Street. And as I was sitting here looking at this, yeah, I'm concerned about the water, just making sure that we do get the irrigation water to the property. But as I look at this, and I've lived here for 28 years now. That field has always had water in it and has always had been a place for water to be absorbed. And as we asphalt and concrete more and more of West Kaysville, we lose the ability to absorb water. So on rainstorms, at my current home, when we built that, and then they built the homes behind us, we ended up with a river that ran down through our backyard, because the asphalts, the homes, the driveways didn't absorb the water, and until Dale Green took care of some of that. When this goes in, yeah, we've got some irrigation ditches that are down there. And if they're going to put in a retention pond to help with some of the stormwater flow, I'm kind of wondering where the stormwater is going to go. Is it going to go into the irrigation ditch and then all of a sudden flood those of us that are using the ditch for irrigation? Because you don't irrigate all day long or 7 days a week with a high flowing source of water. And if all of a sudden we're getting a whole lot more with oil and all of the other things that go in on driveways into the irrigation, what does that do to the irrigation water? So I haven't seen the plan. I don't know if that's been addressed, but it is one thing that I'm asking, is that being addressed? I know Kaysville City is putting in some ponds to clean stormwater to be able to send it on out to the wetlands and to the Great Salt Lake. My question is, how are they differentiating that from the irrigation water that comes through there now, and to protect us currently that we're on there? I know that I'm kind of the tail end of the water user now. Used to not be when Vernon Flint was doing his watering down where Angel Park is. But I just wonder, okay, the ditch that runs down along my property, when we have tailwater going off, it used to run into an irrigation ditch, and now when they did the curb and gutter on Angel Street, they put a tailwater pipe in there and it runs into stormwater. So they are, even so, with the city engineering, back when they redid Angel Street, they cross-contaminated irrigation and stormwater. And that's just my question, is the water going to be cross-contaminated?
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Kathy Johnson. I'm married to Dave, who spoke first. I'd like just to add a few other points that are important to me. First of all, you've heard several people talk about the water, and the water has come past our house for all the years that we've been there, and we've been there for 46. There's some discussion that that's just runoff water. It's not. It's irrigation water that has been there for a long time, probably before I was born. Then the other thing that concerns me, can you put back the picture instead of the map, please? The other thing that concerns me is worked a lifetime to kind of get what we have now. All right, so I don't know how to use this. Never mind, I can walk over and point.
There should be a red button.
What? Technology is not my strong thing.
Give her a horse.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we'll try that. Aha. Okay, there's our place. That pile of dirt is a riding arena. That little round one is a round pen. That's our barn. That's our house. And we've worked dang hard for it. Our good neighbors have been Harvey's. They're this whole corner here on Angel Street and 2nd North is theirs. That is a road that goes up to Bev's house up here, Bev Harvey. These are a whole bunch of trees which mean a lot to me. Like Dave said, the big ditch does go down that line, and when we bought the property, it's just a piece of barbed wire that goes from this tree to that tree, and that tree fell down, so now it's onto this tree. That's a fence, and that's not much of a fence for the horses. But with the water in it, they kind of respect it and don't try to cross. Like Dave said, we did offer many times, begged many times to buy enough land to get the fence out of the ditch, but they won't. So my concern that has haunted me all the time that I knew Harvey's would eventually sell is the sewer. All those houses that they're developing have to have sewer. So Dave's been up to the sewer district, and apparently there are 3 versions for them to get sewage for that whole development. That's Bev Harvey's Lane. There is sewer in it right now with, I understand, 3 for their kids if they decided to build on those lots. Also right there is a lane that was put in to go with that house right there. Kaysville City doesn't own the road, and they've just asphalted it and put in a parking pad at the end, but that does have sewer down it too. That's an option. The other option is the property line. Like you mentioned earlier, it does have a discrepancy on it. They're also talking about going down the property line and digging out all the trees, and I think you'd probably make them pipe the ditch, so that would kill all those hundreds of year-old trees, which means a lot to those of us who ride in the arena, because it keeps the sound and the noise and the sand and all the stuff separate from if the trees weren't there. The sand in the arena would blow all over the place, and eventually when houses or whatever is there, if they dump their grass clippings over, they'll kill the horses. So anyway, that's a real concern for me. So I'm really interested in discussing that, because that really means a lot to me. And then the last thing is, in the effort that Dave's put forth as West Kaysville has developed, there are a lot of, I hate to call him an old timer, but I guess we are now. That hurts. And we could, but we sure aren't going to. Anyway, he has paid attention and been part of the development of things, and the pipes and the sewage and the water and the drainage that's been put in. And my husband Dave and John Flint, and I'm sure there could be others, would be good reference people for the city to check with, to know how things were developed as things went along, because the sizes of pipes and the kind of water that you think are going there aren't necessarily so. So it might be not a bad idea to check on some of those things as future development occurs. So anyway, that's my concerns, and thank you for hearing me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, unless there's objection from the commission, we'll declare the public hearing closed. Let's see, Mr. Frost, anything else you'd like to address?
No, just real brief. Certainly we're going to, Mr. Johnson, certainly we're going to talk about those things, and I think we've shown we've been workable with the neighbors, want to be a good neighbor, and so a lot of these things that were brought up will be addressed, going towards final plat as we go through staff and engineering. As far as the CC&Rs, that was just, we typically don't turn those in until we do final plat anyway, so it wasn't a denial or we've done a million of them, but it'll be similar to Orchard Ridge, so, but we plan on addressing the majority of those things.
Great, thank you. Commission members, any questions? Comments? Lyle, I just have a couple. Some of the things that were mentioned, and I'm wondering if they've been addressed or if they're maybe can be addressed. The landscaping plan for the median. I don't know if that's currently proposed, but that's a suggestion. I assume there's probably nothing that requires it.
So, I was looking as Mr. Halls, if I got that correctly speaking, so sometimes we get bogged down in the details of so many other things that forget all the exact requirements on here, but under the PRED chapter as a preliminary plat, it does have landscape details as a listed item for review and consideration. The landscape, or the median islands itself, so speaking to the road and aspects, so those were a requirement of the development agreement from the City Council to include those. The applicants referenced that they're still willing to do that. I think the question from the public was just overall landscaping, including those items. What does that look like?
Yeah, right.
I think to this point we presumed it's essentially turf type installation, but if the commission felt that additional detail were necessary before making a recommendation, that could be, if not addressed more specifically by the applicant, something that's requested on seeing additional items.
Is there anything at this point that stipulates what medians will be?
So the development agreement talks about where they will be.
Yeah.
So some of the concerns that came up through the rezone process, primarily due to cut-through traffic concerns, stipulated that they be installed at 200 North, and then there's one at 75 South and Angel Street. I do not recall or believe that they specifically outline the size or what's in them.
Yeah.
And so that sort of relates to the comment as mine as staff, is we'd like to see those details moving into the final plat process, was my feeling on it.
All right.
So I don't think I see medians on here. Is that just missed?
Yeah, let me pull it out here. Too many windows.
Is it just assumed that they're in the right of way and they're not specifically shown on these plats?
So,
well, I would think they'd be shown because there's curb and gutter shown everywhere else.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, you won't see it on the 75 South one, so there's a median that's completely outside of the subdivision that's part of the agreement that they would call for. This is hard to see it, but I wasn't clear on it myself. I've discussed with the applicant, they're still planning on it. We've got a legal agreement where that will be in there. It appears that there's possibly some lines where an island could go, but I agree with Commissioner Sunloff. It's not clearly labeled as such at the very least that is shown. So
I mean, there's no medians shown. So if we wanted medians, if the development agreement required medians, then they need to be in. I mean, I'm not personally sold either way, but if they were part of the approval, they need to be in there.
They should be shown. Okay. The point about the retention basin is a good one, putting that in and hoping it doesn't just sit with water all the time.
Well, so let me just make a comment on that. So this is shown as a detention basin. Retention actually retains the water and it stays there, and it
Right.
absorbs into the ground. Detention is temporary, and there's an outlet, and the detention goes. So in theory, if it works the way it's supposed to, there shouldn't be water there. If it was a retention, there isn't an outlet. And there is an outlet shown.
Yeah, correct. This one would have an outlet that feeds into a storm drain system. However, to the point of the public, we do try and check on those pretty cautiously as we get into the engineering of it to make sure they design as proposed.
Yeah. Okay.
We have a number around town that for different reasons aren't flowing through the outlets as we would hope would be the case. But they can work, and then they can be designed to work, and so we would want to ensure that is the case under final plat. So to this point, we've not seen the depths, the full contours, the capacities, and all that as we'll see with final plat. So that would certainly be on our radar as part of the consideration.
Okay.
I think it's legitimate concern to ensure that it functions properly and doesn't just allow for standing water.
Right. Okay. So that'll be addressed. Do you know offhand if the secondary water line is proposed to be looped?
I believe that it was. So with Davis Weaver Canal that services the pressure irrigation, I can't read so forgive me for guessing here with you a little bit, but all the water systems hope to be looped, and so the canal companies is looking at that as well.
I would think you would normally try to do that. So
I believe that the plans show a secondary line moving that direction.
And then as well with the stormwater, Lyle, does the city generally not drain stormwater into irrigation systems?
Yeah, so on this one, I actually know a little bit more on that. Historically, there had been some problems with stormwater and irrigation water being mixed in this area. With 200 North improvements that took place recently, they were able to separate those.
Okay.
And so that's been verified with our public works and some other engineering that is the case. So currently, the water that's going in that should be the irrigation water that they're expecting. And then the subdivision itself has two separate systems designed. So the stormwater would go into one and out another way. Then there's a pipe and that would take care of the irrigation under separate water. So they should remain separated as proposed under the preliminary design. I think kind of the lingering question, which the applicant has shown the irrigation pipe pushing back to the property owners that are currently getting that irrigation water, but making sure it gets to the right point, having the right head gates and things so that the system continues to function. And we continue to receive information on how that works to help make sure that those water rights are retained.
And then the only last one that I've got is I get the point about the trees. And if there's any way to avoid that, I understand that, but I guess that's really going to depend on what happens with the sewer district and how they take that line out of there.
Yeah, neighbors have been great in sharing some of their concerns and comments with us, so we're aware of them, and I don't know to what detail they've had those with the applicant, but to one point, I believe that if they've got the right to go through, that it is a possible option. I don't know that it's the sewer district's favorite option to push it through that way, but there are alternatives. So the district primarily, I think at this point has been very specific with us that yes, they can service the number of units. There are multiple ways that they see that happening, including the one that's proposed is an option that could be pursued further that may work, but certainly it would have that impact. So if the commission finds it within your scope and parameters to encourage it, go a different route, that could be a comment that's made on this. I think where they've got easements in place and potential to put it through there, it may be a difficult demand to make from the commission is to enforce that.
Just a point to note, I guess, as that moves forward. Commissioners, other things? Any other things?
What obligation, if any, does the developer have to improve anything south of this line?
So the temporary turnaround that's in place currently in front of, I believe it's the Burton property. I believe what was referenced here in the meeting. So it does talk within our ordinances about returning once it's no longer temporary use to putting things into the current standard. Speaking with Mr. Burton, I think there's some options there. There may be some interest in keeping that or a similar feature the way he uses his property. And so I think that's still in discussion on what that ends up looking like and how that's dealt with. So, yeah, we.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, could we have you come up?
To
Yeah.
the microphone so
I'd
we
love
can
to
hear
hear
your
from you.
comments.
I'm Becky Burton and Dan Burton, and we have that property on the south border, it's the whole south. We also have horse property. And one concern I had, and until you mentioned medians, but didn't even think of it. You're talking about putting a median on Angel and 75.
Correct.
I would like that maybe to not happen. I don't know about how the neighbors feel, but we can't get a horse trailer. That road is so skinny. Were we to put a median there, we do have horse trailers. It's an active horse property. So we would not be able to get a horse trailer in there without taking out the neighbors with the median. I mean, by the time you put a median and garbage cans and anyone that parks, I don't feel good making the neighbors forfeit that space. Plus, I just know for a fact we couldn't get a horse trailer around there. And I don't think it'd be feasible to bring it through the other subdivision.
Good point.
So,
and then that joining the road, other than not happening altogether, that would be nice. But yeah, it's kind of our understanding, just making it a road, straightening it out. So the turnaround, I believe now is there for the garbage trucks and the snow plows. So yeah, we would just straighten that out, still leave access to our barn driveway. Yeah. Your understanding?
so was the median supposed to be, I mean, there's nothing shown right here on 75. Was there going to be we're going to require them to put a median on 75?
Yeah, so the development agreement that was granted with approved during the rezone required that they put the medians at Angel Street and 75 South in
And
addition to
200
the
North.
one along this property. So it's outside the subdivision plat, so you won't see that at all because it's not part of that, but that's an improvement that's been put in place and was requested by the council that was agreed to.
And so, sorry, I should have been listening, but 200 North as well?
Correct.
Okay.
Sounds like maybe something for thinking again about.
Yeah.
Maybe encourage the council that's the development agreement they approved, the rezone.
Correct. Perhaps the council would have the ability, if the applicant were willing, to amend the
Yeah.
development agreement based on new fillings. But yeah, there were multiple property owners that had concerns on, again, the cut through traffic. There were different ideas that were put up, speed tables and signage and those medians. And it was staff's opinion that we don't like speed tables and speed bumps very much unless we really show through engineering and counts and such that they're needed. And so the developer agreed that they would, in lieu of that, do these island diverters at the entrances as discussed, and it's in the agreement.
Okay.
Will there be, what's the plan for parcel A and B there, the open space right on 200 North? Will there be signage at all for the development?
Yeah, we don't have anything in the packet, but we're planning on having just a basic entry feature.
It's like a monument sign or something?
Right, yeah. And as far as the medians go, one of the reasons why you don't see that, and we'll have it for final plat, is we're trying to decide what that width is. There's a lot of science that goes into that. The Burtons brought up a point with the trailer as well, and so. And we also have to find out on the existing road where utilities are and how that comes about. So there's still some legwork to be done there.
Before you can show those medians.
Right.
Okay. All right. Anything else, Commissioner?
Just say someone brought up on-street parking, but that will be handled or taken care of or addressed in the CCRs, right?
On the street parking?
Yeah.
It's a public street, so it's no different than any other, subdivision. That's been brought up a few times. I'm not quite sure why. It's a public street, and
it'll be like any other public street.
But they're not going to have teenagers living in the home, and in the CCNRs, it's a 55 and older community.
Okay.
It's only 55 and older. It's not somewhat targeted it. It's in the CCNR, similar to Orchard Ridge. So 20%, only 20% under 55 can live there, but usually that's someone that's 49 that had a hip surgery or a widower or somewhat. So that's kind of the demographics of what we have.
Okay, thank you.
Interesting. Okay. We ready to make a motion?
Yes.
Nobody?
Yeah.
Tammy was.
Tammy's ready?
So I'm
was working
trying
for
to
it.
find it. Trying to find the, okay, let me go back to here. Trying to find my
I'll
first
get
page
back
here
to
so I
that.
can remember what it
There
is.
you go.
Okay. All right. Let's see, which one are we on? Okay, I'll make a motion that we're approving, right?
Recommending.
Oh, we're recommending, okay.
Recommending preliminary plat
Okay,
approval.
recommending preliminary plat approval for the cottages at Harvey Estate, right? 1955 West, 200 North for Capital Reef Management, Brad Frost.
And can we just,
We gonna add anything to it?
I'm just wondering if we can also just stipulate in there that the council, upon their consideration, just take a look at the items that we brought up here, the points.
Okay, with a recommendation that council look at the items we brought up.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
And any other discussion? Comments? Alternate motions? We'll begin the voting. I think I'm up. Aye.
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 All right, thanks very much. Lyle, this goes to the council as well, right?
Yes, this is just a recommendation to be forwarded to the city council for their final decision.
All right, thank you very much. For those of you who came and stuck with us for this long. And now everybody's regretting we didn't take that break, right?
Right. Actually thinking that, yeah.
Our last regular item, before we do a few other housekeeping things, is the final plat approval for the Westgate subdivision at 2301 West Schick Lane. Perry Development is the applicant. Lyle?
Okay. Okay. I was going to say I'll try and cover it well because I'm not sure the applicant is here, but they are in fact available. Westgate subdivision is the far northwest end of town on the bottom end of 200 North or Schick Lane. It's been approved previously for rezone, as you can see here, to multiple different zoning districts, and it has received a preliminary plat approval previously from the city council. And at that time, you can see the phasing as was proposed. The closest section to 200 North on the west end would be phased. They've proposed a final plat to start those lots. And so within this development, there we go. You've got 28 total lots on this phase one. 16 of those are in the R1 LD zone on the eastern side of the property, so they're slightly larger lots. And the other 12 are in the R18 zone. That's a standard zone, so every lot meets the minimum width and size requirements as would be found in that. There are no exceptions or common areas as would be found within a PRUD. All the streets are sized to city standard and typical cross sections with our streets. You can see the access off to 200 North. They'll be completing or tying into, I think it's Bonneville Lane to the east and stubbing their road across from Island Way that goes over by Case Creek Elementary. We've been reviewing the utilities pretty heavily on this and are ready to recommend approval, finding it consistent with the preliminary platting and in compliance with zoning and other subdivision standards. And with that, staff's recommended approval for the Planning Commission. You are the final deciding body on a final plat, so this does not go forward to City Council. So your decision tonight will sort of be the nexus by which they get to go to work.
All right. Any comments or questions for Lyle? All right. Representative from Perry Homes, come up please and give us any information you have.
Sure, Dan Reeve with Perry Homes. I think Lyle pretty much covered it, so here to answer any questions you may have. So,
Commissioners, any questions of the applicant? All right, Lyle, this meets the requirements
Yes.
of
yeah.
the ordinance and meets complies with the preliminary plat approval.
That is our findings.
There is not a public hearing on this item, which is good because we don't have any public left.
That's true.
Except Larry, if you'd really like to say something, but no.
No public.
All right. Any other comments, questions, commission members? And we're ready for a motion if someone would like to make one.
Make a motion that we approve final plat for the Westgate subdivision phase 1.
Second.
And a second. All right. Commissioners, any other discussion, comments? Let's begin voting. Josh?
Aye.
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 And aye. We were unanimous on everything tonight.
We've been in sync.
All right. Thanks very much. I think that completes that one. Thank you. All right. Let's run through the remaining items that we have and see if we can get out of here before 10 o'clock. That would be nice. The next item we have on the agenda is a review of Planning Commission bylaws. I've taken the opportunity to look at them. We've talked a little bit in the past about certainly like the city's general plan and the ordinances and so on. And as I've looked at, I took the opportunity as the new chair
Excellent.
to take a look at the bylaws. And you know, as many of you know that I've worked with planning commissions for a long time, and I've seen some good sets of bylaws that really, they're just fine. And let's open it up for any discussion, any comments you have, and any changes that you would perhaps recommend.
So, if I can just maybe summarize the main ones I saw. One was, maybe from the bottom up, was applicants would be allowed to make a verbal request to remove a item from consideration during a meeting. Doesn't need to be in writing. Some stuff about scheduled meetings, regularly scheduled, and allows us to cancel and reschedule. The secretary doesn't have to be a member of the commission. The chair has to follow not only other requirements, but the ordinances of Kaysville. And then, yeah, right. And then removal of a commissioner from the commission if essentially extended absences become a problem. Was there anything else that I missed?
I think that pretty well covers it.
And I'll just maybe make a note too. So you'll see there's a previous set of bylaws which are existing, and then the ones that have been proposed, it was essentially a rewrite with a couple of those just tweaks to based on our findings. I think one of the important keys that I liked about the new bylaws is it's a little bit more clear on the procedure of the meetings, how we deal with applicants and items, and you saw some of that tonight. I see you essentially followed the new bylaws on that is outlined. So hopefully that'll help us be more consistent chair to chair on how we're handling items during the meeting. So I thought that was very appropriate.
Yeah, what you got in your packets was the bylaws that I had put together and proposed, and then the changes, or some of the additional changes that the staff made after I sent that on to them. Mm-hmm. And it's considerably different than what the current bylaws are that we have as a planning commission. And you can find these bylaws, I think they're on are they on in our Dropbox file?
Yeah, so the current ones are in your Dropbox. I think is the easiest way to find them. If they're in the packet as well this evening for as part of the report. But yeah, if you ever need to look at them in more detail, if you're ready to adopt new bylaws this evening, or if you have questions.
Yeah. What's your pleasure? Do you folks want some more time to take a look it over? Or should we move forward tonight? What's your feeling?
So, okay, now I'm more up to speed of what I'm looking at here.
Yeah.
Makes more sense now. Okay, so on 5.4, I like, let me just think out loud here for a minute. I like that because it keeps it informal.
Right. Yeah. I don't want to, I mean, I've seen commissions that work really best are relatively informal, because you start getting too formal and then you get bogged down in procedures, and people get uncomfortable, and the audience is uncomfortable to speak, and so keeping it fairly informal. But when you do need to get down to a point of order, then you need to make sure that you can make a ruling, and so it kind of stipulates how to do that. But yeah, you're right, Josh. Try to keep it, relatively informal.
Yeah.
That's when you seem to get the best comments out of people.
I agree, and then it doesn't come across as a mandate or dictatorship kind of situation.
Yeah.
It's
Or a
actually
legal
form-
proceeding or
Yes,
something like
exactly. It's
that,
not.
yeah.
People feel like they've been listened to and can interact.
So what do you think? Do you all need some more time? Do you want to take, hold off until our next meeting, give you a little bit more time to come over?
Should we, I was just thinking maybe we could wait so we have the full,
Yeah.
the missing people.
And get their comments
and
as
get
well?
their comments as well.
Sure. So if that's, if any other comments on this, or?
No, I think it's great. You've clarified things quite a bit, so.
All right, let's do that. Then let's put this back on the agenda for our next meeting. Send them out again, and then have the discussion. Hopefully our other two commissioners will be here as well, and we can see if we move forward on those. Okay, thanks. All right, let's get down to our last items, which, since I haven't memorized what they are, the order they come in, Lyle, I think most of them pertain to what you do now.
We'll let you cheat
First
on
of all,
the
a call to
projector.
the public. Larry. You're the public, all right.
No.
And then reports, correspondence, and calendar from staff.
Yeah, so I've got a number of them. We'll try and keep it brief. As far as reports, to have on your radar, so this building will be under construction and remodel sometime next month. And not exactly certain how quick that will start, but my expectation is I'm just not planning on being able to meet during the month of September and potentially until July of 2020 in this building while remodel and construction work is taking place, which means planning commission meetings will have a new home. We've looked at different options. I've talked to the chair about it and explored some alternates just to make sure. There are a number of facilities around town that we could use if we expect a very large group, that they're available, but on a regular basis. Davis Tech, the Botanical Center, and others couldn't quite get what we need. So what we will be doing is meeting at the fire station on a regular basis. Again, there may be the occasional messy item where we know there's going to be a lot of public, and I think I've got some resources where we can find a larger space if needed. So we'll still be here in 2 weeks for our regular meeting in August, but if you're not familiar with the fire station, where it's located is just south of us a little bit on Main Street. You would come in from the south side of the building. We'll have that open up. They've got a training room area that was where we'll be holding the meetings, just right off that main door. And that's something that we can utilize consistently and have for certain for each of our meetings, as we're meeting that second and fourth Thursday of the month still. So keep an eye out for that.
Lyle took me over there to, we looked at the room, and it's got some challenges.
Yeah.
It's not going to be the best room to hold meetings in, especially, I think, doing the projection. It's kind of, the way the room's configured, it's kind of narrow and so on. And it's going to be tough to either so that the audience can see it or we can see it. And it's got some challenges, and it's not the biggest room. But how long are we going to be there, Lyle?
So the estimated completion is June of 2020. Hopefully there aren't too many setbacks through that process. So I've kind of been expecting perhaps a year we could be there, but so starting September through June, it was a good 9 months that we'll be over there. Yeah. And so hopefully these informal settings and the conversation, if we need to get creative on how we're seeing things, it may be a learning curve on how we set things up as we're there, but I think it'll at least function. Pros and cons to this room as well, and hopefully when it's all said and done, when we're back in this, it'll be new, shiny, and function substantially better than it does today with less tripping hazards. So anyway, if any of you need additional detail on where that's at, or you want to see it, or anything, then you don't hesitate to reach out to our office, and be glad to give you more. If it's not working at all, again, I agree with Commissioner Summercorn. It's not ideal. I think it will work. It's better in spaces I've seen other commissions meet in, but it doesn't mean it's the best. Again, I've been in contact with some other locations. They just can't guarantee that they'll be able to keep the building open as late as we may need it. nights like tonight. They can't guarantee a year out that they'll give us a room. On it. And so there's other conflicts, but we do have some good options if needed that we can continue to explore if we're finding some struggles in that. So that's report one.
Is that where the council will be meeting as well?
I'm not 100% positive, but what I understand the council is doing is they're hoping to go on tour. So we will have a consistent location at the fire station, but the council, my understanding is that they are hoping to, I don't know if every month change locations, but at elementary schools and schools around the city. So taking their meetings to the people of sorts. They'll rotate where they hold their council meetings.
I thought they were going to do like London, LA, New York, Singapore.
Budget's not there. Right. So that sounded scary to me. I like a sure tried and true thing in a location where we can make things work, and that's what we're up to. But if we have to get creative like that, if we're finding it doesn't work, then...
Is the fire station room better than the police station one?
So staff will be living in the police station room. The police station room is a better location, but while we're out of this building, many of us will be in very tight quarters trying to function out of that EOC room at the police station. Otherwise, it is a great place to meet, and it's a good facility.
And is there any classrooms or meeting spaces in the library?
I've reached out to the library building. They have the Simmons Auditorium, but they can't guarantee it. One, it wouldn't be available. There are already conflicts for several months before they even have a Thursday where we could meet. And then ongoing past that, there are some concerns and conflict with staffing it late and things like that we may need on occasion. 9, right? So it's out there. I've been in contact with the county about that. And again, if we know we've got perhaps a large crowd that we may need, I think we can fit 40 or 50 people at the police station, probably us included. So it'll hold pretty good, but a better option than the library, I think, just based on availability, is the Botanical Center and the extension classrooms at Utah State, because they do seem to have more options, a little bit more availability, but there are still enough quirks out there that they couldn't just say, yeah, it's yours, every Thursday going forward to plan on using it. So, yeah, I mean, if you're aware of other spaces, again, Davis Tech is one I've reached out to, similar deal. They have rooms that it could work in, but just the coordination of the regular ongoing meeting is problematic currently, and the availability on that. So
the recreation basketball court, the old fire station.
Yeah, the oldest. We could. I could look into that. Yeah, the acoustics are a little tricky in there, and there's some other items, but it is a space big enough that I am not bound to one or another, other than getting I think the audio will be the hardest part in any of the locations. And the visual, yeah, there are some tricks to that too, but we won't have this microphone system, so you get a space too big, it's going to be tricky, and with some of the acoustics, and but I honestly am open. So if that's okay with the commission, we expect in September we'll look at that. Let's try the fire station. If it isn't working, please let me know. I mean, I think it's good enough that I'm not worried about going in there and just expecting failure right off the bat. But it has all the restroom facilities, drinking fountain, and everything that the public will need as well outside of the meeting room itself. And I think it's a pretty good space. The next item I just wanted to update with, so there are a couple of you were still expecting devices, so that's moving along. I hesitate to make promises, but I think by next time you can go paperless, so we'll keep you informed on that. We have made updates based on the last conversation to our website and contacting you as planning commission members. So if you're interested in looking at it, but essentially we made an attempt to set it up so that they're not able to contact you individually. They know names and faces of who's on the commission, who's a chair or vice chair, and as they submit comments, they click a link, you all get an email sent to you. So hopefully that'll help with some of the concerns that were expressed last time on some of the communication that's taken place previously that may do so. If you see other issues or have concerns with it, again, let me know and we can continue to adjust and improve it. The final item that I have on here is more the calendar item. next Wednesday. We're looking from 6 to 8 for the open house, again, to continue the discussion on housing in SB 34. I'll try not to hammer it too much right now. I've sent out some correspondence and heard from you on some that are willing to participate. Any comments that you have for refinement on surveys or outreach or the materials that we're hoping to present, I think we could do some of that offline and just let me know by email so that we're ready for that. I think we're inching pretty close to having something where hopefully we get the kind of feedback we're looking for. So if you haven't seen that, check your email. Let me know if you have questions. Give us a call at our office and we can continue to improve what we're presenting to be ready. Unless you'd like to discuss that further this time.
Where's that going to be at? The open house?
Right here.
Yeah, just right here?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it will be 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock, open forum, so people can come and go as they choose. In brief, we'll have 6 to 8 kind of tables set up, talking about different topics that people can rotate through to both learn about why we're doing it, what some of the options are that we've kind of honed in on that we think could be good choices, and to allow them to give feedback as to what they like, where they think it might work, that kind of detail. So it's hopefully effective in getting some turnout. We've been pushing it out online and through social media and our website, and it's included in the newsletter along with some information from council member Page here with us that hopefully get some interest engaged in the community.
Now see, that could be fun when we have a planning commission meeting.
Oh, we gotta go, end the meeting.
Won't be long.
Okay, yeah, that's all I've got for the commission, so unless there are items you have for us as staff that you'd like us to be working on or questions.
August 23rd, a Saturday morning, there is that Land Use 101 training again for those who might be interested and haven't had that. It'll be similar to, some of you have been to it, and it'll be similar to what has been done before, but that's August 23rd.
Yeah.
No,
I'll
24th,
send it out.
sorry, 24th,
I
Saturday.
Yeah, I'll send it out. I don't believe I forwarded it. Oftentimes they hold it here in Kaysville, so you can go to it. I don't believe they are on this particular one, but it's not too far of a drive to get into the Salt Lake area or Ogden area, I think, where the others are, if you're interested. So I'll forward it nonetheless, and you can look at it.
Yeah.
If you're unable to attend this, are they doing them monthly? Is it every other month?
It's not monthly. They have like 4 or 5 dates through the year. The one after August 23rd will be like November 5th or something like that. And then, of course, then there's the league conference, September 12th, 13th. September 12th date is the Planners Day. Most of the sessions will be planning-related topics. And they've got some good speakers coming at that conference on September 12th.
I'll forward those along to you so that you guys can look at those dates, times, and information. If you're interested, let us know, and I'll have that to you in your email so you can consider it.
Okay.
I think that leaves us with one item left on the agenda.
Yeah. Anything hot coming on our agendas next few meetings?
We continue to see interesting rezones kind of coming in. I don't know if they're hotter than the ones that you're currently seeing this evening. But more and more people are having to get creative on how to use their property. We attempt as a staff not to, we will paint a picture of what we hear from the community, but not to discourage them if they're interested in it, come ask the powers to be on it. So anything of extreme interest, I don't know. We continue to see some commercial development in our business park. Some of our subdivisions are continuing to go forward. Ovation Homes, that was here this evening, and their property east of Highway 89 is nearly ready for construction of homes. Yeah. So it feels like there's been a little bit of a lull in some respect on the number of subdivisions and entitlements that I might expect to see, but I don't know if we're just waiting for it all to come to a head and start pouring through. So
yeah,
the construction will continue, lots of road construction and other things that other departments in the city are busy with. So
it's a lot of road construction everywhere.
If you haven't been lost in West Kaysville yet, go drive out there with the detours.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, anything else from any of the commissioners? If not, we're ready to have a motion for adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Without debate and without
Right.
vote, we shall adjourn. Thank you.
Excellent.